Hi, everybody. Hello, welcome. Hey, Too Cute. Hey, Taz. Hey, Straight. That's late to that party. Hey, Transformation Tiffany. Hey, Champagne. How you guys doing today? I am here just to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to focus on the next couple of weeks of what happened at the Playboy Mansion. What I did is I recently purchased a couple of books from the different Playboy Bunny, and I'm going to share with you guys some of their experiences and just a comparison from what I saw. This gave me an idea what I watched from Choke No Joke, and it gave me an idea to start going follow the books of some of these people. So I went and got some audio books and just trying to see some of comparison to what actually happened, and showing you guys that the Playboy Bunny um, guru had rules. He had regulation in the treatments that he did. He had 5 to 7 girlfriend at one time, and he died peacefully. No charges has ever been brought against him. He had underage girls at his home. He did a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff. And I'm just gonna share with you guys some of the books. Just entertain me for a moment. But I'm going to go ahead and start. Hey, Sharon. Hey, Therese. Hey, Transformation Tiffany. Hey, Miss Brown. Hey, Perspective Me. Hey, Nicole. Nika. Hey, I think Transformation Tiffany, I said it already. I said hi to Too Cute already. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and play it, and we're going to discuss this. Where's my disclaimer? Disclaimer. I need my disclaimer. There's my disclaimer. Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. Tiffany. All right, let's do this.
The Rabbit Hole: Curious Adventures and Cautionary Tales of a Former Playboy Bunny by Holly Madison. This is the author. To my family, which inspires me to be a better person every day. Thus grew the tale of Wonderland. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Author's note. Don't you miss the mansion? Squealed a round-faced, wholesome-looking 20-something girl in a high-pitched voice. I started, unsure of how to answer her politely. No, I said, offering her a half-hearted smile. Here I was, an independent, successful woman, making millions of dollars a year all on my own, headlining a hit show on the Las Vegas Strip, co-producing and starring in my own television show, and this woman was asking me if I missed the mansion? Clearly, the public perception of the life I shared with Hugh Hefner at the Playboy Mansion was a far, far cry from the actual reality I experienced. That question wasn't really that uncommon. Fans would regularly ask me about my time living what they assumed was this lavish, decadent life in Holmby Hills, and whether or not I regretted my decision to leave. Hef really fucked up when he let you go, a young fan said, shaking her head at a Las Vegas meet and greet. That was another one I was regularly on the receiving end of. It's okay, I would always say. I'm much better off now. I couldn't and still can't believe that these adult women were actually serious. While filming the e-reality series The Girls Next Door, I never thought of myself or my two co-stars as role models or anyone to be taken seriously. I thought people were just laughing at us. I thought of us as walking advertisements. Don't try this at home, kids. I'm not stupid. I know how unsavory the whole situation was. You could read it all over my unsmiling face. Cameras often caught me rolling my eyes or looking totally disinterested. As if I didn't feel trapped enough, I built up a wall around me. I'd gotten myself into a bad situation, but I became distinctly aware that was not the impression fans walked away with. The show was the epitome of mindless reality television, which was fine. We all have our guilty pleasures that we like to unwind to at the end of the day. There's something underneath the surface that isn't okay about it, though. Around the turn of the millennium, it became fashionable for women to appear stupid, to get by solely on their looks, and to be only concerned with fame and materialism. Some of the effects of that moment in the zeitgeist still linger today. And somewhere along the way, I too bought into the ludicrous fantasy, perhaps even more so than others. While there was a part of me that acknowledged the idiocy and superficiality that surrounded me, I fell for the glamour, hook, line, and sinker. It took years for me to realize just how manipulated and used I'd been. I could never admit that to myself at the time, because to do so would have been to acknowledge how dark and scary a situation I was in, and how very little in control I was. I'm an adult. I'm here because I choose to be. I'm here for adventure, a once in a lifetime experience. I'm here as a stepping stone to something else, I routinely told myself. And perhaps the biggest disillusion, I'm here for love. Deeper and deeper, I fell down the rabbit hole. Many people may think that I'm biting the hand that fed me and that I should be grateful for the opportunity Girls Next Door and Playboy afforded me. And while I am grateful, it's also clear to me that most people fail to realize that there are two sides to every coin, and that even the most fantastic fairy tale has a dark underbelly. Being attached to Playboy can make people not want to have anything to do with you, even in quirky, crazy Hollywood. There were many times the hateful backlash made me wish I stayed the broke, awkward 21-year-old waitress I'd been before Hef came into my life. When I finally did find the strength to leave the mansion, I began receiving lucrative offers to reveal my version of events, but I never pursued them. I wasn't interested in writing a sensational tell all for the sole purpose of exposing someone else's strange habits and dirty secrets. Don't worry, you'll find those things here, but in the context of something bigger. I wanted to have my own story to tell too. To this day, it astounds me the number of misconceptions that abound about my life and my experiences while at the mansion. Usually, the version of the story most flattering to Hef is the one that prevails. I've seen both sugar-coated and sensationalized accounts of life at the mansion, but nothing I've ever read remotely resembles what I actually experienced. I always thought it would be classy to not kiss and tell, but after a while, you just get sick of having other people trying to tell your story for you. Hopefully, once you hear my story, you will be able to understand why I made some of the choices I made, and why I also felt trapped by those choices. I hope that sharing my mistakes can prevent someone else from making similar ones, or give someone the courage to leave a bad situation. This starts off as your typical small town girl goes to Hollywood story that we've all heard 100 times before. But it's also much more than that. It's the unauthorized, never before told story of the Playboy Mansion and the man that holds the key. It's a behind the scenes account of reality television at its most decadent and absurd. It's a cautionary tale. It's the story of betrayal and abuse, but ultimately of survival, success, and redemption. And finally, it's a real life fairy tale with heroines, villains, odd characters, strange happenings, and of course, a happily ever after. Some of the names in this book have been changed to protect the innocent, as well as some of the not so innocent. When you've journeyed into a dark world where publicity and fame are commodities so deeply desired and unable to be bought, you're hesitant to give some of those people who have hurt you the attention they so desperately crave. But I am here to set the record straight: the good, the bad, and the ugly, the naked truth. I was born a girl with an insatiable appetite for the extraordinary, the strange, the unusual, the glamorous, and the morbid, and I experienced all of it. So follow me down the rabbit hole. The truth may be stranger than you imagine. Prologue. I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have been changed several times since then. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. 1988. It wasn't the most lavish looking present under the tree. The flat, square package was wrapped in a simple green and white paper with a glossy red drugstore-bought bow and addressed to me from my aunt. When I was 9, Christmas wasn't necessarily the spectacular event it had been in years past. I wasn't particularly interested in toys anymore, but I wasn't yet mature enough to appreciate the more practical presents. Holding the soft object in my hand, I didn't expect much. Carefully, I peeled away a corner of the paper to reveal what appeared to be the bright blue cover of a book. With a bit more eagerness, I tore away the remaining wrap and read aloud the words, Marilyn Monroe Paper Dolls. Of course, I had heard of Marilyn Monroe before. Madonna had spent most of the 80s replicating the movie star, most memorably in her 1985 Material Girl music video, and like most fourth grade girls, I idolized the pop singer. But I don't recall ever seeing Marilyn before this moment. Smiling up at me from the cover of this gorgeous book were two illustrations of the starlet. One dressed in a black sequined showgirl costume and top hat from her 1953 movie Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and one in a casual pink sweater and capris with flowing blonde curls from 1952's Clash by Night. Flipping through the thick, glossy pages, I saw a variety of costumes from her most famous roles. A pageant swimsuit with sash and tiara from We're Not Married, a cream gown with a pink and purple frilly kimono wrap from The Prince and the Showgirl, a green and yellow Bo Peep inspired ensemble from one of her earliest roles, and so many more. More than 30 different costumes, including one of the starlet in nothing but a bathrobe draped over her otherwise naked body, filled the pages to dress the bikini-clad Marilyn Monroe cutout figure. On the back of the book was a biography detailing how the orphan Norma Jean became one of the world's greatest movie stars. With extra special care, I methodically cut out the figure and each of her glittering outfits. I spent hours dressing and redressing my Marilyn doll, imagining how she must have felt in each moment, the weight of those gilded gowns, the sounds of an active movie set, the wondrous eyes of countless admirers, and the decadent Hollywood parties I could only dream about. My little world felt so limiting. Bouncing from Oregon to Alaska, then eventually back to Oregon again, no place ever really felt like home. I grew up hunting, fishing, reading, and playing in the woods in Alaska. When I arrived in Oregon, I was a fish out of water. The kids in my new school loved two things and two things only: sports, which I had never played, and video games, which I couldn't afford. Not to mention, my social skills were lacking. I frequently tried to reinvent my image, my group of friends, and my hobbies, but nothing ever felt like me. The other kids treated me like an outsider because they thought I was different. They were right. I was different. I dreamt of a world outside of my little rain-soaked suburban bubble. I'd fantasize about a glamorous career and all the amazing costumes I would wear one day. I thought that if I wished hard enough, perhaps I would fall down the rabbit hole and find myself in a decadent world beyond my wildest dreams. And Norma Jean Mortensen did that, didn't she? She escaped her boring existence and became Marilyn Monroe. Quickly, my fascination with the star escalated. Every Sunday morning, I would grab the newspaper and pull out the TV guide. My eyes would scan over the programming list, searching for the titles of any of her movies listed in the book. The first one I finally came across was Bus Stop. I set up our family VHS player to record it when my parents weren't looking. They let me keep the paper dolls, but they didn't really care for Madonna or Marilyn or such frivolous fascinations. I found that first film a little dull. Some of the nuances in Bus Stop went right over my 9-year-old head. After all, they couldn't always spell everything out in the 1950s. As weeks became months, my VHS collection grew and I became acquainted with most of Monroe's better-known pictures. How to Marry a Millionaire quickly became my favorite, mainly for the campy 1950s fashions on screen. Yes, I know what you're thinking. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that because of the film's title, but the title and the plot had nothing to do with why I liked it. I loved the three main characters. They were just too irresistible. Model roommates played by Lauren Bacall, the smart one, Marilyn, the romantic one, and Betty Grable, the athletic one who always said what was on her mind. As for Marilyn herself, I was absolutely enchanted with the glamorous creature whose beauty transcended the small television set in my family's living room. On screen, she appeared to have everything she ever dreamed of: fame, beauty, fortune, and of course, love. Someday I'll know what it's like, I thought. Someday I'll know what it's like to have it all. 2002. If I just put my head under the water and take a deep breath in, it would all be over, I thought. The bathroom was empty as I swam alone in the giant marble tub. The air was chilly inside the mansion walls with a draft that always seemed to rustle through the rooms. I pulled my shoulders under the warm water and rested my stoned eyes on the wall opposite me. But could I really do it? I dipped my toes in and out of the water and listened for the quiet echo the splash made as it bounced off the tile walls, feeling like an exotic fish trapped in some enormous aquarium. Outside the bathroom, the mansion was eerily quiet. It was unusually calm at this hour of the night. We spent yet another evening out at one of Hollywood's hottest nightclubs. Like clockwork, we went clubbing every Wednesday and Friday, before coming home and retiring to Hef's room where we all smoked weed and went through the weird, bi-weekly bedroom routine, which was nothing like most people imagined it to be. To an outsider, our evenings looked incredibly glamorous. 7 beautiful women dancing the night away behind velvet ropes and bulging security guards, private table service to cater to our every desire, and exclusive access to the club, all at the expense of the world's most notorious boyfriend, Hugh Hefner. But if you looked close enough, each girl appeared just a little bit vacant and merely going through the motions of what life ought to be. Life inside the mansion wasn't at all what I expected it to be, not even close. Everyone thinks that infamous metal gate was meant to keep people out, but I grew to feel it was meant to lock me in. I wasn't quite sure how I ended up in this curious, often dark world, but I was petrified by my own fear of what it would mean to ever leave. Tucked away inside Hugh Hefner's rolling Los Angeles estate, I was controlled by a spur-of-the-moment decision I made at 22 years old that I had grown to deeply regret despite the extravagant world it afforded me. It was a decision that changed the course of my life. I had to believe that there was a greater purpose for the choices I had made, whether it was to help advance my career or whether it was truly for love. And depending on the month, the week, and sometimes even the hour of the day, I would waffle back and forth between precisely why I was living a life as nothing more than girlfriend number one to a man who was old enough to be my grandfather. I didn't want to admit that I had sold a bit of my soul for the chance at fame. Would anyone even miss me? It's amazing the dark places your mind can wander when you're depressed. The depths of my own depression had led me down this very dark path, and there was no gleaming light, however distant, at the end of this tunnel. Maybe it was the pot and the alcohol, but drowning myself seemed like a logical way to escape the ridiculous life I was leading. I just couldn't take my misery anymore. Of course, my family would be devastated, but I rarely saw them enough for my absence to make a difference. From a distance, it appeared as though the girlfriend's days consisted of bopping around Beverly Hills shops, driving flashy cars, and toting designer handbags. I played the part of the perfect girlfriend well, a bubbly, fun-loving, carefree girl who loved her dogs, her lifestyle, and most important, her boyfriend. Playing that role quickly became second nature, and the blurred lines of reality made it so that some days I struggled to even remember what I was like before moving into the mansion. It was like a high-stakes version of teenage politics. Sometimes you try so hard to fit in that you almost forget it's all an act. I was afforded many things while I lived at the Playboy mansion, but never the opportunity for the sort of self-discovery most 20-somethings enjoy. Public criticism and speculation have always trailed Hef and his harem of young blonde girlfriends. Do they all sleep with him? The more conservative folks would wonder. It's all an act. They're just paid to be arm candy, the younger crowd would usually surmise. How does he keep up with them all? The older men marveled. But life inside the Playboy mansion wasn't exactly the sexy fairy tale my ex-boyfriend would have you believe. In fact, it was like a bedazzled, twisted prison where the inmates developed their own hazing and hierarchy, and where the release back into society was the equivalent of being excommunicated. How would the other girlfriends react to my death? Among the 7 girlfriends, I had only one friend, Bridget Marcourt. Surely she would be distraught over my death, but I couldn't imagine the other girls would shed even a single tear. The climate inside the mansion was toxic. I didn't participate in the cocaine vendors, the side boyfriends, or all their harebrained money-making schemes that were all in direct violation of Hef's house rules. I rarely left the mansion, so making it home in time for curfew was never an issue either. Needless to say, my goody two-shoes reputation wasn't the most welcome among this group of girls. In fact, they'd probably view my unexpected demise as an opportunity to get away with more shit, as Hef busied himself with the public relations rollout regarding a death at the mansion. Not to mention, it would mean less competition. Yep, they would be glad I was gone. Would Hef even feel bad when he heard the news? He'd probably be completely shocked. In his eyes, as long as each girlfriend had a substantial allowance to buy nice things and the ability to bask in the reflection of his fame, that's all she needed to be happy. He would surely never concede that my misery had anything to do with him or the life he provided. Would he even miss me? No. I was certain I was just another warm body, as we all were. Just another blonde, I could hear him say. Internally, I decided he would label it a devastating accident. His main concern would be navigating Playboy out of any sort of PR crisis. A small memorial might even be held at the mansion, but it would glorify my days at Playboy and with Hef, once again promoting the idea that life inside those walls was nothing short of paradise. And just like that, I would be swept under the rug with every other scandal and ghost that once plagued Hugh Hefner, and my memory would involuntarily serve as yet another public reminder of the beauty that is Playboy. I think that knowing my death would be in total vain convinced me not to go through with it. In truth, I didn't really want to die, but I saw no other way out. Thankfully, the only thing greater than my need to escape was my desire to share my experience. If I sunk my head below the water and went to sleep, no one would ever know the truth. Eventually, I'll tell my story, I thought. I wasn't sure when, and I wasn't sure how, but someday I would fight my way out. Someday I would be whole again. Chapter 1. Begin at the beginning, the king said very gravely, and go on till you come to the end. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Slowly, the large iron gates surrounding the infamous compound creaked open and our shuttle began its ascent up the steep driveway. My nose was pressed so tightly against the window, anxious to spot any sign of the luxurious Holmby Hills estate expertly hidden by the lush foliage, that my makeup smudged on the glass. Over my shoulder, I heard a fellow partygoer point out the first glimpse of the 20,000 square foot Gothic Tudor that was steadily coming into view. "There it is!" a man in silk pajamas shouted. I craned my neck to spot the roof and fixed my eyes on the horizon as the mansion began to surface. Like an early morning sunrise, it was magic. The estate, situated on 5 rolling acres in one of LA's most prestigious neighborhoods, looked like a castle from a fairy tale. My large eyes widened, trying to fully absorb this moment. As the shuttle reached the top of the driveway, my girlfriend Heather spotted the infamous Playmates at Play sign and nudged me in the ribs. "Look," she said, her smile so large I thought it was about to snap off her cheeks. We both burst into laughter. We were positively giddy. We are actually here, I thought. I made it to the mansion. It had become a goal of mine to see the inside of these walls, and I told myself that I could now happily check that one off the bucket list. I even wondered if I would meet Gatsby himself, Mr. Hugh Hefner. My story wasn't atypical. A small-town girl, farmer's daughter, so to speak, who dreamt of becoming someone extraordinary. There were less than 10,000 residents in my hometown, and my high school graduating class was smaller than the guest list to most Hollywood parties. Since then, it has seen a boost in tourism thanks in part to the Twilight movies. But let me assure you, there was no Edward Cullen sauntering through my lunchroom. After graduation, I moved 30 miles away to attend Portland State University, which didn't feel far enough, but it was the best I could do. It was early 1999, and I was in my second year in college when I heard on the news that Playboy's Millennium Playmate search was coming to Portland. Immediately, my mind started to wander. I found Oregon's weather depressing, and I didn't feel like opportunity exactly lurked around every corner there. I'd been thinking a lot about moving to Los Angeles to try my luck, but I didn't know anyone in LA or have the financial means to make such a big move. Apparently, according to the report, the magazine had been conducting a nationwide on the road search for the Millennium Playmate. A gigantic tour bus traveled the United States and Canada, stopping in 45 cities testing candidates. The girl chosen would receive $200,000, would appear inside the January 2000 issue of Playboy, and be flown around the world to represent the men's magazine for the entire year. It sounded like just the opportunity I was looking for. This wasn't the first time Playboy popped up on my radar. Like many children of the 80s, it wasn't abnormal for us to have a Playboy magazine subscription arrive at the house. I even remember my mom and dad studying the front cover once to find the hidden rabbit head. As a kid, you think that sounds like a pretty fun game, but we were quickly told that it was for adults only. One day, my sister and I were scouring the house for any Christmas presents my mom may have hidden when we came across a few Playboys that had been hidden away. We flipped through in absolute hysterics, pointing out all the bare butts. I was a kid, so I thought it was hilarious. While Playboy wasn't completely foreign to my home, it still felt rebellious. I knew that if I auditioned for the Millennium Playmate and happened to be chosen, my parents wouldn't be thrilled at the prospect of me posing naked, but possibly would have respected my decision. It was a reputable magazine with a storied history, so it felt edgy, but also somehow safe. Plus, at the time, many of Hollywood's biggest stars were appearing in the magazine. Cindy Crawford, Jenny McCarthy, Drew Barrymore, etc. Not to mention, my icon Marilyn Monroe was Playboy's first ever cover girl. Naturally, I too had pipe dreams about one day being in the magazine. This is perfect, I thought. I'm going to audition. According to the news report, the process was quite simple. Call the provided number, make an appointment, and show up with your favorite bikini. That's when my genius idea to fast track my stardom hit its first speed bump. I didn't actually own a bikini. In my defense, I lived in Oregon. Why would I need a bikini? And when I say things were tight financially, I mean they were tight. But I decided it was about time to make an investment in my future. After calling the number, getting the address where the bus would be stationed, and securing an audition time the following week, I went shopping. Needless to say, Portland wasn't brimming with retail shops specializing in swimwear, but I had remembered seeing one downtown near my college campus, so I popped in to see what I could find. I didn't really know where to begin. Obviously, I had never taken photos in a bikini before. This was about 15 years before selfies became popular, so I didn't know what I should be looking for. After scouring the racks for the best deal, I decided on a silver metallic bikini that was both sexy, but also one that I felt reasonably comfortable in. Before the audition, I figured I should probably get some sort of tan. There weren't too many sunny days in the Pacific Northwest, so my complexion was incredibly light, particularly when coupled with blonde hair and a silver swimsuit. I went to the nearby tanning salon and had my first experience with a tanning bed. I was terrified of going to my audition bright red, so I asked for the lowest possible voltage. It wasn't a drastic difference, but it did the job. As I pulled into the address I had been given, I spotted the tour bus immediately. It was so large that it stood out like a sore thumb in the hotel parking lot it was stationed in. When I arrived, I was ushered inside the hotel lobby with the other potential playmates to fill out some paperwork before stepping onto the bus for the audition. Over my new metallic bikini, I wore a barely above the knee black mini skirt and a white button down blouse in hopes of capturing that girl next door image photographers were apparently looking for. And to be honest, It was also the sexiest outfit I owned. To tell the truth, I was a bundle of nerves. I had never modeled before, so the idea that I'd be posing practically nude was terrifying. But I figured that since editors were hoping to discover new talent, they were expecting girls to be relatively inexperienced. On the bus, I envisioned a few stylists helping candidates with hair and makeup touch ups, and a distinguished photographer guiding the amateur models into the most flattering poses. Don't get me wrong, I knew it wasn't a full blown shoot, but I expected at least a little help. It was Playboy after all. After a few minutes of waiting, I was escorted to the gigantic 45-foot long tour bus with two other girls. We were made to wait in the ultra luxe living room area, which was wrapped in leather with a 7-foot movie screen in the back. I remember thinking that it was nicer than any home I'd ever been in. Framed portraits of Playboy's most iconic covers hung on the walls that reached up to a mirrored glass ceiling. A man with a clipboard walked into the room and greeted us. He gave us a brief history of the magazine and then asked that we go around the room and introduce ourselves and say why we were there. One girl looked like a Pamela Anderson-inspired stripper with white poofy hair, a clingy silvery dress, and clear plastic platform heels, and appeared to have brought her pimp with her. For a moment, I remember wondering if she was actually a female impersonator. There weren't too many women like her running around Portland at the time, and I was so distracted by her appearance that, for the life of me, I can't recall a single thing she said. The other girl was pretty, but not too remarkable, and I'd guess about 10 years older than me. I came to try out because I've always wanted to be a playmate, she gushed. The man with the clipboard smiled and nodded, pretending not to have heard this response more than 20,000 times already. And me and my best friend have a bet on who would become one first. I want to be Miss April. Then it was my turn. I've always dreamed of moving to Los Angeles and becoming an actress, I explained, the other two candidates glaring at me. I love Marilyn Monroe, and she was the first playmate, so that's why I want to be in Playboy. For some reason, each of us believed we were total shoo-ins. I mean, I really thought I had a shot. Knowing what I know now, though, none of us ever stood a chance. After the meet and greet, each girl was called one by one into the onboard photo studio. When my name was called, I stood up and pressed the creases out of my skirt before making my way into the room. It all felt very rushed. Besides the photographer, the room was empty, no stylists or coaches to speak of. Hi, Holly, how are you? The photographer said, staring down at my application in his hand and guiding me towards a white backdrop. This will be great. Just relax, have fun. I was instructed to strip down to my bikini for the first photograph. Brimming with nerves, I did what I was told. Awesome, great, the photographer said hurriedly. Now, can you take off your top? Oh, shit. He wants me to do what? I thought. He's not going to take pictures of my boobs, is he? It was incredibly naive, I know that now. I'd figured that the first round of photos were just to see if you were cute enough to be called back, and then perhaps we'd discuss the possibility of more revealing photos. I wasn't expecting to get naked at that very moment. Begrudgingly, I shed my top for a photo. Given how incredibly awkward I felt, I can't imagine it was the most flattering photograph. Immediately, I felt the urge to do some kind of damage control. I'd signed my life away on the photo release, so could they use these photos even if I wasn't selected? I said, clearing my throat. Could you make a note or something that you don't have my permission to use these pictures unless I'm selected? The photographer gave me a weird look, clearly not expecting that kind of reaction from a girl auditioning for Playboy. Okay, I'll make that note, he said before scribbling something down on my application. That was it. 10 minutes and I was done. Now, looking back, I don't think I could have done anything more damaging to my chances. Hi, I'm Holly. I want to be in Playboy, but don't use my topless photo. But at the time, I wasn't prepared for it. Of course, I had hopes of becoming the Millennium Playmate, but I sure as hell didn't want a topless photo of myself snapped in the back of a bus to be printed in the magazine. Worrying about it appearing online wasn't even a consideration back then. What if they did a spread of all the girls that auditioned? Not too surprisingly, I never heard a word from them. When the Millennial Playboy issue eventually came out, a set of Peruvian twins graced the centerfold. The girls were models from Miami who never even stepped foot on the Playboy bus. The tour was mostly a publicity stunt for the January issue. Wow, twins, I thought. I never stood a chance. In the previous issue was a 4-page spread called Girls of the Millennium Search, showcasing collages of nude photos from the girls who auditioned on the bus. It was exactly the type of story I wanted to avoid. Frantically, I scanned the pages but didn't see my photo anywhere. Thank God I said something. Although after signing the paperwork, I'm pretty sure the editors could have done whatever they wanted with my photo. Yet, while I didn't want to end up in some throwaway section of the magazine, I had to admit I felt a bit defeated. I thought I'd blown my opportunity to appear in Playboy. It wound up being 6 years and a very strange twist of fate before my next chance at a pictorial. In the meantime, I decided to transfer schools so I could make my way to Los Angeles. Before I left, however, there was one thing I needed to do. I took a deep breath as I plunked 3 brand new credit cards down on the receptionist's desk. Like every college student, I had received a slew of credit card offers in the mail and applied for as many as I could get. Since the limits were so low, it took 3 cards to cover the $7,000 plus my new set of breast implants would cost me. As each card swiped through the machine, maxing out one after the other, I carefully filled out the paperwork with nervous excitement. You might think my failed Playboy casting was the reason I was now sitting in the doctor's office preparing for an expensive cosmetic procedure, but that was really just the straw that broke the camel's back. The past several years, I'd struggled with insecurities about my chest, or lack thereof. I'd always been naturally curvy from the waist down, but from the waist up, I was as skinny as a stick figure. This had plagued me through high school, and I spent those years perpetually armed with a heavily stuffed wonder bra. I wasn't trying to appear stacked per se, I was just trying to balance the proportions of my body while I waited for the bombshell chest I was certain I would one day develop. I remember gaping at Anna Nicole Smith's Guess ads when I was in junior high, hopeful that I would be just as voluptuous one day, but it never happened. I even sent away for herbal supplements guaranteed to increase your chest by 2 cup sizes. Surprise, they didn't work. I actually called and got my money back. The nurse led me into the pre-op room and instructed me to change into the scratchy hospital gown. I had never even had the most minor surgery before, but I was young, fearless, and determined to look my best. After all, you only live once, right? I was sure I would pay the credit cards off in a timely manner. It was no big deal. After the procedure, I woke up feeling like I had been run over by a garbage truck. The doctor had made the surgery sound so simple during my consultation that I actually thought I would be up on my feet that same day. Foolishly, I planned on keeping the entire ordeal a secret from my parents. I wasn't in the habit of discussing my private anatomy with my mom and dad, and since I'd been stuffing my bras religiously for years, I figured they wouldn't even notice. There was no way they would have allowed me to pile on all this massive credit card debt in one swoop, but I didn't want to hear anyone's advice. I was always one of those stubborn kids who insisted on learning things the hard way. The nurse rolled me out of the facility in a wheelchair to meet my friend who was scheduled to pick me up. Slumped over in the passenger seat, I realized there was no way I could keep this from my parents. After she pulled into the driveway and walked me to the front door, I not so gracefully stumbled through the entryway and flopped on my parents' couch, clutching a barf bag full of bile to my chest. In this state, I had to explain the whole ordeal to them as they shook their heads with a mixture of amusement and amazement. Luckily for me, I had long been rebellious and they were used to my crazy antics. After a few days of recovery where I felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest, I finally made it to the mall to buy my first post-surgery bra. As I tried on a handful, I finally found a perfect fit. I looked at the tag on the lacy white Victoria's Secret Dream Angels bra. A 34D! The surgeon had told me he couldn't guarantee what size my breasts would end up being. I had asked for a C cup using a topless photo of a playmate as inspiration. I couldn't believe I was a D cup. I was huge. While I don't regret the surgery, I couldn't have been happier with my body. The credit card debt would end up becoming too much for me to pay off in a timely manner, contributing to money troubles that would end up haunting me in the years to come. Shortly after the surgery, with roughly $100 in my bank account, I packed up my battered red Toyota Celica and made my way, like countless girls before me, down the Pacific coast for a chance at making it. After 2 years at Portland State University, I transferred my credits to Loyola Marymount, a private university about 5 miles south of Santa Monica. I was earning a double major in psychology and theater arts and figured there was no better place to study acting than in LA. Student housing was already at capacity when I arrived, so transfer students were put up in a hotel across from campus, 2 students to a room, until we could make other arrangements. I thought it was so cool getting to live in a hotel, and I didn't want to have to move out after my first semester. Not to mention, apartments in Los Angeles were really pricey, and I was anxious about having to eventually factor that into my already tight budget. I hadn't been in Southern California more than 24 hours before I realized I needed a relatively well paying job, and quickly. At a friend's suggestion, I headed to the Hooters in Santa Monica to apply for a waitressing gig. Much to my surprise, I was hired on the spot. Thank God for my new boobs, I thought. My first day on the job, the manager handed me the signature Hooters girl outfit and motioned for me to go change. When I emerged from the stall in the women's restroom, I paused to take a long look at myself in the mirror. How can I go out on the floor in this outfit? I thought. I'd never felt so naked in an outfit before. The breeze of the air conditioning went right through the thin tank top and tiny spandex shorts as if I wore nothing at all. And the shorts were so tiny, the girls' butt cheeks always hung out of the bottoms. I often thought the restaurant should have been called Cheekers. The only blessing was the nylons. Hooters girls were required to wear tan pantyhose to make their legs look flawless, but to me they also added a measure of decency. Suck it up, Holly, I thought. My dream was always to make something of myself, and by allowing me to afford to stay in LA, this job was a means to that end. I had read an article about Hooters girls in Jane magazine that highlighted how much cash they earned in tips. There was no way I was giving up this opportunity. I fixed my hair, put a smile on my face, and walked out the door. And you know what? It really wasn't that bad. I soon learned to love my job. After a short time in the city, I settled into a tiny Westwood apartment with my friend Nora. Besides a mattress, a lamp, and a pile of school books, my room was all but empty. My Hooters salary was barely covering my daily expenses, so I relied heavily on scholarships in order to pay for a portion of the hefty tuition at the private university. What was left over for me to pay? Well, let's just say it went unpaid for quite some time. I was 20 years old and almost delusionally confident and optimistic. I was convinced I could do anything I put my mind to, even become a famous actress and get my college degree within a few years. I knew I wasn't always the hottest girl in the room, but I also knew I wanted success so badly that I would work harder than anyone else for it. For a while, I did manage to juggle it all: the school, the job, and the auditions. There was only so much longer I could keep it up, though. I was burning the candle at both ends, and something was bound to give. As it happens with transfers, many of my credits from Portland State didn't apply towards my program at Loyola Marymount. In order to graduate on time, I'd have to load up on credits, which included long theater hours that would require working backstage on different productions during the evenings when I typically waitressed. I knew that with a packed school schedule and a full-time job, I wouldn't have any time to study. And if I couldn't study, I wouldn't be able to meet the minimum grade requirements of my scholarships. So after a year at LMU, I decided to take a break from school to focus on pursuing my career. I would never be as young or as eager as I was in that moment, and I figured that I might as well take the plunge. School would always be there, so if it didn't work out for me, I could easily go back and finish my degree. It's not unusual to graduate from college at 30, but it's a lot less likely to break into acting at that age. In my heart, I thought it was the best decision for me at the time. With school on hold, I picked up more shifts at Hooters and eventually started working part-time as a Hawaiian Tropics model. The gig basically required me to show up at events in company apparel or appear in movie bit roles in swimwear and a Miss Hawaiian Tropics pageant sash. I thought it would be a great way to make extra money and also to meet people. In Hollywood, you never know where opportunities would arise. I would end up being right, of course. The gig would lead to something, though maybe not what I had expected. Not long after, at a Hawaiian Tropic bikini contest in Beverly Hills, one of the event organizers pointed out an older man. "You see that guy over there?" he asked. "That's Hugh Hefner's personal physician." Naturally, it was exciting that someone associated with Playboy was at the event, but I didn't give it too much consideration until an hour later when the man approached me. "Would you be interested in attending a party at the Playboy mansion?" he said, barely taking the time to meet my eyes. My mouth fell to the floor. He posed the remark as a question, but it was clear he already knew there was only one answer. He'd apparently been at the party offering invitations to the girls he deemed Playboy party worthy. It wasn't abnormal for a representative from the magazine or one of Hef's friends to invite attractive women to the parties. Many of my coworkers had become regulars at the mansion. I guess I just wasn't expecting an invitation of my own, and especially not from his doctor of all people. Was he really asking me if I want to go to the Playboy mansion? I thought. For a starstruck girl from Oregon, this felt like the chance of a lifetime. "Are you kidding?" I squealed. "Of course." In Los Angeles in 2000, there was only one invitation that mattered, a Playboy party. Nowadays, invitations to the Playboy mansion are sold to the highest bidders and to any media outlet offering any morsel of publicity. It's no longer considered exclusive or coveted. But back then, it was the place to be. Hef threw only a handful of parties each year with a maximum capacity of about 800, and the guest list was strictly invitation only. When I received my glossy black invitation in the mail a few days later, I could feel my heart swell with excitement. "Hef's Midsummer Night's Dream Party," it read. On the front was a beautiful pinup illustration by famed artist Olivia de Berardinis, and inside was a small piece of paper with directions. It was like Cinderella finally scoring an invitation to the ball, except instead of arriving by horse-drawn carriage, we would board a shuttle at a UCLA parking garage. The dress code was strict. Sleepwear required. My coworker Heather had also landed an invitation, a huge coup for me considering invitees weren't allowed a +1, so we immediately started obsessing over what we would wear. Despite having very little flexible income, I decided I needed a new lingerie set from Fredericks of Hollywood. A black satin corset with matching garter belts, thigh-high stockings, and a short yet conservative silk robe to wear on top of the ensemble. Bikinis and Hooters shorts aside, it would be a little while before I would be comfortable parading around in lingerie or less, the staple look at a Playboy party. One by one, guests stepped off the shuttle. Every inch of the estate seemed to sparkle. Bright white twinkle lights lit the walkway towards the decadent soiree. Gorgeous colored spotlights draped the cascading waterfalls framing the pool. Both Heather and I were so overwhelmed we barely spoke a word to one another as we took in the magnificent grounds. Before we entered the party, a staffer asked to take our photograph. We didn't even question why, as one by one each woman stood for a Polaroid. When we finally made our way around to the backyard, we spotted the most lavish buffet of food I had ever seen. For two broke waitresses who mainly existed on top ramen and chicken wings, it was a feast fit for royalty. Seafood bars, carving stations, sushi buffets, dessert carts, and gorgeous-looking drinks flowing from the flagstone bar next to the pool. Suddenly, Heather jerked my arm and pointed across the lawn. "Oh my God, there's Cameron Diaz," she said, pointing to the tall, beautiful blonde sitting at a table nearby. And next to her was Jim Carrey. Across the pool, Heather spotted Leonardo DiCaprio. It was a virtual who's who of Hollywood. Holly, Heather, we heard our names through the crowd. Who could we possibly know here? It was a welcome relief to see our friend Kira, another Hooters server, waving to us from across the party. She navigated her way through the sea of people with the expertise of someone accustomed to these types of events. Working together, I knew that Kira had seen her fair share of Playboy parties. You guys want a tour? She posed the question as if we had just happened into her very own living room, and we immediately took her up on the offer. She walked us through the infamous candlelit grotto, which was still empty at this early hour, through the zoo where we fed grapes to the tiny monkeys, and inside the 70s themed game house before making our way into the main event. Gorgeous, colorful fabrics clung to every corner of the grand tent rooftop, while faux grass lined the bottom, creating the illusion of some fantastical forest. Although I'm quite certain that many of the people in attendance didn't make a habit of reading Shakespeare and, in some cases, quite possibly had never even heard of the play the party was named for. Everything looked so sensuous and inviting. It wasn't until we were tucked away in a corner of the tent that I finally spotted our infamous host, looking quite gloomy, especially for a man flanked by two of the most breathtaking beauties I had ever seen. The Bentley twins were tall, tan, and reed thin, with slow, languorous walks. They conducted themselves like royalty, as if they were on the arm of a king or a president, but dressed like sex kittens in custom-tailored Barachi costumes. Shimmering with beads, sequins, and Swarovski crystals on French lace skirts and tops, their outfits were unlike anything any other partygoer was wearing. They were sexy, but oh so elegant, with perfectly painted faces and blonde cascading curls decorated with glittery butterflies. They were picture perfect and, needless to say, made a lasting impression. He never stays for that long, Kira said when she saw me looking over at Hef and his fabulous girlfriends. I watched as Hef sat in a crowded corner of the tent, shaking hands with one partygoer after another. My first thought was that he appeared really out of it. Was he senile, I thought? More likely, he was just bored. After 50 years of glad handing, I'd imagine you'd get sick of it too. I knew I didn't have long before he made his escape, so Heather and I headed towards his table to introduce ourselves. Maybe Mr. Playboy would see me, think I was pretty, and suggest I audition for a pictorial. It was a long shot, but I figured it couldn't hurt. Stranger things could happen. Hi, I'm Holly, I said, sticking out my hand to meet his. What's that? He asked, clearly having trouble hearing over the crowd. I'm Holly, I repeated, a little louder. Oh, hi. Nice to meet you, darling, Hef said before turning his attention to the next person. There were no fireworks, no Rhapsody in Blue, and there certainly wasn't any audition. Oh well, I thought, I gave it a shot. Chapter 2. In another moment, down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was to get out again. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. A year after my first Playboy Mansion invite, I had become something of a fixture at the infamous Sunday Fun in the Sun pool parties. After that fateful Midsummer Night's Dream party, Heather and I started getting invited back to the mansion regularly. What wasn't to love? Bikinis, drinks, food, music, and friends. And without fail, the sun was always shining on Hef's little corner of heaven. He wouldn't have had it any other way. Without the massive tents and fake grass that the staff sprawled out for the Midsummer Night's Dream soirees, you could really appreciate the true beauty of the property. Lush landscaping, rolling green hills, and exotic birds that roamed freely throughout the grounds. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was truly an oasis in the middle of Los Angeles, and a life so unlike my own that I almost envied the women who were able to call this magical place home. Of those women, the glamorous Bentley twins had already exited the mansion by this time, leaving an opening for a new crop of blondes to emerge, most of whom also wound up being published in the magazine as playmates in rapid succession. In the Playboy culture, it's considered an honor to be chosen as the magazine's Playmate of the Month. The large pictorial includes a poster folded in the center of the issue, hence the name centerfold. An even bigger honor was to be chosen as the magazine's Playmate of the Year. Every June, a winning Playmate is selected from the previous year's 12 candidates and is awarded $100,000, a new car, a new pictorial, and a cover. Most girls who rotated through the Playboy revolving door prayed that they might eventually be chosen as a Playmate so that their names would be in contention when it came time to choose the Playmate of the Year. Hef's new girlfriends weren't all necessarily Playmates, but they definitely all aspired to be. In fact, to an outsider, it could easily be misconstrued that the only way a blonde was eligible to be featured in the magazine was to date its editor-in-chief. Month after month they appeared. Brandy Roderick, Buffy Tyler, Katie Lohman, Kimberly Stanfield. Tina Jordan and 3 of Hef's other girlfriends were in the process of shooting soon-to-be-published Playmate pictorials as well. Hundreds of women were invited to each mansion party, so of course not all of them could be Playmates. Some of the Playmate hopefuls unable to land one of those 12 coveted spots, modeled for less prestigious minor pictorials in Playboy or for pictorials on Playboy.com. The guest list for the Sunday pool parties was much more selective, so I have to admit I was flattered to have been included. Only 20 or so girls were invited to these more intimate events, splashing the day away. Yet it was rare to see any of Hef's then 7 girlfriends at the pool party for any length of time. I remember it striking me as odd that they chose to hole away in their mansion bedrooms, but I didn't give it much thought beyond that. I would later realize that they considered it a due they no longer needed to pay. As for Hef, he would tuck away in a corner of the pool and play backgammon with 2 friends, usually the only other males allowed to be in attendance. Occasionally, they would stride over and join the girls in a drink or a game, but they mostly kept to themselves and always focused their attention on Hef. After all, they wanted a repeat invite, and Hef, without actually saying a word, made it clear that the girls were solely for his amusement. The staffers who strictly refused all tips were readily available to wait on us hand and foot. The mansion gym was available to any of the girls who wanted to work out during the party, perhaps a red flag to the expectations placed on the women of Playboy. And a masseuse was on call in the bathhouse for guests looking to further unwind. One afternoon, I was freshening up in the bathhouse and talking with a girlfriend when a buxom woman named Nicole bounded in and introduced herself. She was very sweet, but I could barely stop gaping long enough to get a word out. This woman had the largest breasts I'd ever seen, so large that it looked like the implants were struggling to escape from under her skin. The masseuse had to go rustle up an extra stack of towels just so Nicole could lie on her stomach for the treatment. Years later, I was flipping through an issue of Playboy and recognized the busty blonde from the bathhouse. Only this time her name was Coco and she was married to the rapper Ice-T. It's been her booty that has earned her the most attention, but strangely enough, I didn't notice her butt as unusually large back then. Probably because I couldn't take my eyes off of those boobs. When the light would eventually dip below the hills in yet another picture-perfect sunset, the service staff would busy themselves with preparations for the evening's dinner and movie screening. The pool party guests would excuse themselves to freshen up as the festivities moved inside. Eventually, some of the girlfriends would trickle down from upstairs and idly take their obligatory seat next to Hef at the dining table for the pre-movie buffet. I could never understand their lack of enthusiasm. They seemed to have it all. Initially, I assumed they were spoiled, jaded, or just not a good fit in Hef's world. Maybe they hated the social scene or hated watching old movies every week. Since those were things I happened to love, I couldn't understand it. As an LA transplant, the concept of being fake was still a bit lost on me. Don't get me wrong, I was familiar with fake tans, fake nails, and of course fake boobs, having already undergone my breast enhancement surgery. But I didn't have any idea how insincere and calculated people could be. It never dawned on me that the girls I was about to be spending a lot of time with had ulterior motives beyond simply being friendly, and that all of their encouragement was just for show. As I'd come to learn, they saw me as a useful pawn in their twisted game of Playboy chess. In those early days, Vicky and Lisa, two of Hef's live-in girlfriends, were incredibly welcoming. The other girlfriends weren't particularly mean, but they didn't exactly roll out the red carpet either. I knew that the role of girlfriend was coveted by many and fleeting for some, so I expected the women to be defensive, protective, and quite frankly, bitchy. Especially this crop of girls who looked more like garden variety strippers than dazzling Playboy bunnies. I was surprised with how wrong I thought I was. They were accepting and encouraging, some more than others, and Vicky, one of the more seasoned girlfriends, even offered to take me under her wing as I navigated this new foreign world. It really didn't occur to me that they had their own agenda, which I would soon learn. The girls would rattle on about how glamorous it was being a girlfriend, and how every girl that moved into the mansion would eventually become a playmate. They all had a weekly allowance to buy club clothes and get their hair and nails done, and the afternoons free to spend however they like. As a girlfriend, you just needed to be available on the nights when Hef hosted events at the mansion, went clubbing in Hollywood, attended red carpet parties, etc.
Sorry, guys. I think it stopped. Hold on. I got a call came in. Sorry about that. Don't call me. They're calling me while I'm trying to play this for you guys.
Clubbing in Hollywood, attended red carpet parties, etc. This may sound naive, but I didn't immediately realize that they were actually required to sleep with Hef. Back then, none of the girlfriends talked about it. When I inquired about some of the more intimate duties, Vicky fiercely denied that anything sexual went on with Hef. It's all for show, Vicky said, explaining that the whole thing was basically a Hef-orchestrated publicity stunt. The girlfriends were simply dazzling arm candy to help keep up his Playboy image. It sounded more like a job than an actual relationship, and they sold it to me so matter-of-factly I was able to overlook what this job really sounded like. Hef's former girlfriend, Katie Lohman, had recently left, and Vicky told me that when she went on Howard Stern after scoring her centerfold and cheerfully denied that any of the girls slept with Hef with a dismissive laugh, she was promptly kicked out of the mansion. Years later, I found a taped copy of the interview in Hef's press collection with a skull drawn on the label. He must have really hated that one. I would be lying if I said I still didn't have dreams of one day scoring a pictorial in Playboy's iconic pages, and mansion parties were a fun way to spend the weekend, but my main focus was either pursuing an acting career or going back to school. I didn't have time to be Hugh Hefner's on-call trophy girlfriend 7 days a week, nor did I really think I had what it took. When I first started coming around, Hef was dating the Bentley twins, those two sophisticated glamazons that seemed to pay homage to the glory days of Playboy. With the right hair and makeup, I considered myself a pretty girl, but Mandy and Sandy looked like movie stars. After they departed the mansion, the sloppy seven invaded and lowered the bar. It's almost unsettling how quickly your priorities can shift. Over the past year, I had been working long hours to afford my rent, and I'd been auditioning like crazy. Luckily, I had no trouble getting an agent and even managed to land a few bit parts here and there. They didn't pay much, but it was enough to encourage me to continue pursuing my dream. My two closest friends hadn't been as fortunate. Heather had given up and decided she was moving back to Pittsburgh. My roommate Nora hadn't landed a single thing either. The lease on our apartment was ending, and she told me that her parents had agreed to pay her rent on a new lease, but only if she had her brother, an alcoholic who needed constant babysitting, move in. Just like that, I had to go. It was like that scene in Bridesmaids where Kristen Wiig gets booted from her apartment by Rebel Wilson and her on-screen brother, only not funny. Nora knew I had no credit and was broke as a joke. I couldn't believe she was doing this to me. But as hopeless as the situation seemed, I refused to go back to Oregon. Not only did I not want to burden my parents, I also knew that leaving now would set back any progress I had made in becoming an actress. The desire to perform is what drove me to Los Angeles, and the thought of returning home miserable and still dreaming of Hollywood killed me. I started to wonder, couldn't Playboy help me reach that goal? I'd seen it before. Baywatch Hawaii executive producer Michael Burke was a mansion regular, and Hef's former girlfriend Brandy Roderick landed a leading role on the show shortly after appearing as a centerfold. The more time I spent at that enchanting Holmby Hills compound, the more I started seeing opportunities like these. It's very easy to get transfixed by the magic of this curious world, where even the impossible seemed possible, where a small town girl could rub elbows with movie stars and be made to feel like a fantasy. I had spent so much of my youth searching for that kind of opportunity, and it seemed Playboy could hand it to me on a silver bunny emblazoned platter. One weekend, while waiting outside of the mansion's front door for the valet to pull up my beat up old car at the end of a Sunday fun day, I looked up at the glowing second story windows and wondered what it would be like to call that place home. It looked so cozy and safe. Vicky had once given me a peek inside her room, and I was surprised at how much it looked like the type of room I would have liked to have. The plush bed was covered in pink candy striped satin sheets and piled high with Playboy branded clothing, free gifts for Hef's girlfriends. Disney paraphernalia was everywhere from a recent shopping spree at Disneyland, all on Hef's tab, of course, and a dreamy window seat overlooked the backyard. We even ordered cheeseburgers from the kitchen, which may not sound like much, but it was. Once upon a time, Hef's guests could order whatever they wanted from the kitchen whenever they wanted. It was even said that Jack Nicholson used to treat the mansion as a drive through back in the 70s. He would call the butler's pantry ahead of time, order a meal, and have it brought out to his car as he drove up the driveway. After the food was delivered to him in a paper sack, he would supposedly speed out the back gate without so much as a hello. Since then, guests' access to the kitchen became a little more limited, but Hef's girlfriends could still order whatever they wanted 24 hours a day. To me, someone used to scraping together pennies in order to eat at Burger King, this was on another level. I had to admit, the whole girlfriend thing was starting to look pretty appealing. Around that time, a few of the girls had suggested that I come out with them for one of the bi weekly club nights. One of the girlfriends, Kimberly, had recently been kicked out, which meant there was an open spot Hef was ready to fill. Talk to Hef, Vicky encouraged after I confided in her about my housing problems. Never did it occur to me to simply approach him myself. It also never occurred to me that the then 7 girlfriends only wanted me around because my ordinary appearance was non threatening. They wanted to make sure whoever filled the empty space wasn't competition. On Sunday, I worked up the nerve to mention the idea to Hef when he finally appeared poolside. I'd love to come along with you the next time you all go out, I said, bracing myself for a less than exuberant response. Much to my surprise, he immediately took to the idea and invited me to join them that coming Wednesday. Awesome, I cheered with a little hop. Thank you. Hef seemed amused by my childlike excitement, but quickly turned back to his friends. When I found Vicky to share the good news, she filled me in on all of the details. I was to meet Hef and the girls at 10 p.m. in the mansion's main entry hall, dressed to impress in my sexiest club wear before heading to Las Palmas, Hollywood's hottest nightclub. Every girl, at some point, has uttered the phrase, I have nothing to wear. But in my case, it was sort of true. I spent the next 3 days staring at the approximately 10 items of clothing hanging in my closet, wishing that something appropriate would magically appear. I figured that if Hef approved of how I looked, maybe he would consider offering me a role as a girlfriend. It felt like a long shot, but there was always a chance, and my alternate options were becoming more and more grim. I would not be going back to Oregon. I just couldn't. Still, I was too embarrassed to ask any of my friends to borrow anything, probably because doing so meant I would have to field questions I wasn't prepared to answer. Eventually, I decided to pair a black miniskirt, which, despite its name, was about 3 inches longer than anything any of the girlfriends wore, and a baby blue top with metal mesh overlay that tied in the back. After analyzing my every angle in the bathroom mirror, I took a deep breath, jumped in my car, and made the 10-minute drive to Hugh Hefner's place. I pulled into the driveway at 9:55 p.m., petrified that I would be the last to arrive. I've always been a stickler for punctuality. I quickly discovered that was a rarity at the mansion. I waited in the entrance hall for more than 10 minutes before any of the ladies made their way down the cascading Old English staircase. There was another girl waiting downstairs named Candace who appeared to be auditioning for the open girlfriend spot as well. She was quick to tell me that she had already been out with the group the previous Friday, and also how fond Hef was of her. Oh shit, I thought. Maybe I was a day late and $1 short. Candace might get offered the empty girlfriend spot before me. In passing, the mansion looks decadent, but when taking the time to truly look at some of the nooks and crannies, it's amazing how neglected it was. I would come to refer to the decor as 70s porn chic. At the time, there were 9 dogs living in the mansion, most of them named after fashion designers or luxury car brands, naturally, and the ancient yellow carpeting on the grand staircase was covered in urine stains. I remember thinking that the carpet must have been older than any of his girlfriends. That being said, at the time, it was by far the nicest home I'd ever stepped inside. Finally, the girlfriends emerged in ascending order, newest to the oldest. At that particular time, the cast of characters was a motley crew of bottle blondes. A quiet girl named Carolyn, upcoming playmates April, Adriana, and Lisa, Vicky, and Tina Jordan, Hef's main girlfriend. The scene was almost comical as each girl bounced down the Gone with the Wind-esque staircase like a carbon copy of the girl before her. Whitish blonde hair and large barrel curls, the skimpiest sparkly dress imaginable, and the kind of strappy platform heels you'd expect to see on stage at a strip club. Being Hugh Hefner, I would have thought he preferred his girlfriends sexy and retro, but his taste was surprisingly, well, cheap. As for Tina and Hef, they would never arrive until everyone was already in place, like some antiquated nod to the hierarchy that existed. One of the butlers arranged us in the hall and snapped a few pictures for Hef's scrapbook before we piled into the limousine, another Playboy tradition to satisfy Hef's endless desire for mementos. The next morning, prints would be placed outside each girl's bedroom door, which only amplified the massive pressure to always look perfect and caused the girlfriends to spend hours critiquing their appearances. When we finally arrived in Hollywood, the scene outside of the nightclub was absolute chaos. Hundreds of men in Von Dutch trucker hats and women in their obligatory low-rise Frankie B jeans and fedoras, because in 2001, every club girl was just dying to be mistaken for Britney Spears, were bombarding the entryway, clamoring over one another to get the attention of the resident doormen stationed behind the red velvet rope. From the looks of it, you would have thought Oprah was inside giving away free cars. As the limo door opened, 4 security guards rushed to part the sea of clubgoers so we could make our way inside. I had been to nightclubs before, but I was usually one of those unlucky souls not on the list and relegated to the mile-long line that wrapped around the block. I was one of the first to step out of the limo, and every set of eyes turned to check if I was someone worth knowing. I started fussing with my top, unnerved by this unexpected attention. One by one, each bottle blonde piled out of the limousine, waiting for Hef before we made our way inside. Vicky must have noticed the astonishment in my eyes because she leaned over and whispered, "NSYNC and Christina Aguilera were here the last time we came." When Hef finally emerged from the car, the crowd went wild. People were shouting his name and shoving one another to get a better look. He lifted a hand to wave to the crowd as if he were some kind of dignitary. The whole thing seemed incredibly strange to me, but for Hef, it had become a regular part of his weekly routine on the LA club scene. For decades, Hef was an infamous homebody. After all, he created his own version of paradise at the Playboy Mansion, so why would he ever want to leave? Throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was extremely rare to see him out and about. In 1999, when he separated from his wife of almost 10 years, Kimberly Conrad, a few of his friends persuaded him to leave his compound for a night on the town. What happened next was a surprise to everyone. People went absolutely crazy to see this 70 something icon from another era at an LA nightclub. Shortly there,
Oh my God, every time. Hold on, y'all.
Shortly thereafter, Hef instituted his bi weekly club nights. Rolling Stone magazine called it Hugh Hefner's resurrection. I would later learn that this sort of behavior wasn't atypical. The only thing Hef loved more than the mansion was himself. The sort of super fandom he saw at these nightclubs was all the fuel this senior citizen needed to keep painting the town red. It was during one such evening after his separation that Hef met Sandy and Mandy Bentley. Immediately, he began dating these two blonde bombshells, along with another blonde, Brandy Roderick. This unusual foursome made Hef even more of a sensation. The age difference, the number of girlfriends, the hint of incest, the fact that all three of the girls' names rhymed, along with Hef's constant public insistence that he had to take Viagra to keep up with all of these women, made the situation truly bizarre. In Los Angeles, the bizarre is often appreciated, if only momentarily, and at that moment in time, Hef and his blonde entourage had become adored mascots of the LA nightclub world. As soon as we entered past the velvet ropes, we were whisked away to a private area next to the dance floor. Hef settled into the plush booth flanked by Tina and Lisa. Our VIP table was already stocked with an array of alcohol and mixers. This was the golden age of bottle service, and Hef indulged in every luxury. Security lined the velvet ropes separating our table from the rest of the crowd. If a guy were brazen enough to try to get the attention of one of the girlfriends, security would block them from our table, and occasionally escort them outside of the club depending on how persistent he was. Since most nights the girls were locked up in the mansion like some twisted version of Rapunzel, they used these evenings out as opportunities to meet other men. Yes, most of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends had other boyfriends. In fact, during my time at the mansion, I can only say for sure that two of us remained faithful, my future BFF Bridget Marcourt and myself. Needless to say, this was all very hush-hush because Hef strictly forbade any of his girlfriends from dating other people. While Hef could date an entire sorority house full of girls, we were to remain totally loyal. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that rule existed not so much because Hef was jealous of other men, but because the truth would have burst the public persona he had spent decades crafting. Girls who were caught cheating on Hef would be thrown out of the house immediately. While the girls took that rule extremely seriously, it didn't mean they would actually obey it. So, on these club nights, the girls would dip off to the ladies' room and head to a corner of the bar, hidden from Hef's view, making friends and exchanging numbers with men, like normal 20-something girls should be doing. I stayed close to Vicky most of that night and followed her lead, dancing, drinking, and making sure to pay lots of attention to Hef. At one point, when he stood up to dance with us, his rhythm was so off that I was certain he was joking and let out a big laugh. Vicky shot me a look that made it very clear he was not joking. Luckily, he didn't register my laugh as mocking and continued dancing. Oh my God, I thought, genuinely mortified for him. Had no one told him how silly he looked? He pulled out some truly ancient dance moves that I can't imagine were remotely cool in any era other than the 70s. I felt a bit sorry for him dancing around like the punchline of a bad joke. Did they always allow him to look so foolish? I wondered why these women, his 7 dingbats, didn't care enough to protect him from the embarrassment. Surely they owed him at least that. And worse yet, they encouraged his awkward dancing about. Back then, he seemed like such a sweet man to me, and this felt unnecessarily cruel. Regardless, I knew it wasn't my place to break the news to him, not that night anyway. I was so eager to make a good impression that I could hear my heart in my ears. I was grateful that Hef allowed me to tag along in the first place. He seemed like a good man and talked as if he wanted the world for his girls. But like all that glitters and sparkles, this opportunity wouldn't come without a steep price. Would you like a quaalude? Hef asked, leaning towards me with a bunch of large horse pills in his hands, held together by a crumpled tissue. No thanks, I answered cheerfully as if I were interviewing for a job. I don't do drugs. Okay, that's good, he said nonchalantly. Usually I don't approve of drugs, but in the 70s they used to call these pills thigh openers. I laughed nervously, unsure of what to say. I was proud of myself for saying no. It was the right decision. I still felt in control of the situation and was prepared to tackle whatever came my way with sober eyes. Today, I want to scream, pause, and freeze frame that moment of my life back in late August 2001. I want to grab that young girl, shake her back into reality, and scream, what the hell are you thinking? Hef was a notoriously lecherous 70-something old man offering me quaaludes that he referred to as thigh openers. Are you kidding me? Why didn't I run for the nearest exit? It doesn't get much creepier than that. But I suppose I had already made up my mind at that point. Looking back, I can't imagine what I was thinking, but I'm also so far removed from what I was feeling back then. I was about to be homeless. I had no place to go and was panicking over what to do next when this opportunity with Hef just sort of fell into my lap. If I became a girlfriend, I would have somewhere to live. If I became part of Playboy's inner circle, perhaps that could even help my career. I felt as if my stars were starting to align. I decided to take the chance and see what this strange, legendary world was all about. For as long as I could remember, I had been searching for a great adventure, and this was already the craziest night I had ever experienced. Like watching a bizarre old movie, I was utterly transfixed by this strange universe. Despite my initial intention to keep a clear head, I foolishly proceeded to get really, really drunk without even meaning to. I can't even begin to tell you how much vodka and champagne I consumed, aided by the helpful hands of the other girls who were all too eager to continue plying me with drinks. While I patted myself on the back for turning down the pills, by the time we left the club, I couldn't have been more incoherent. On the limo ride back to the mansion, Candace leaned over and whispered to me that all of the girls, myself included, were expected to join Hef in his bedroom. She had a small smile on her face as she watched me absorb this news, which I immediately registered as odd, almost as if she relished my shock. For the better part of the year, the girlfriends went out of their way to convince me that no one was actually intimate with Hef. Was Candace just trying to scare me off? I wasn't an idiot. Despite their staunch denials, it was still a widely accepted public theory that Hef slept with all of his girlfriends. But when I asked them about it directly, they were incredibly convincing, acting almost appalled by the idea. This important factor was the touchstone of their entire sales pitch, and the fact that it wasn't just true, but that it would also be required, wasn't exactly something I'd prepared myself for, especially for my first night out. But at that point, I felt like it was my only option. Maybe it wasn't that torturous, I thought. Why else would all these pretty young girls be jumping through hoops to be girlfriends? I could just see what it's all about. If it's that bad, I'll leave. What happened next is all sort of a haze. With roughly a third of a bottle of vodka sloshing around my stomach, I stumbled up the mansion's grand staircase and was ushered by the girls towards Hugh Hefner's bedroom suite. Tina brought me into the back door of the bedroom, which led into the large black and yellow bathroom. All of the girlfriends, in various stages of undress, conglomerated around the large black marble bathtub with their feet dangling in the pool of hot water. I followed Tina's lead, took off my shoes, and dipped my feet in. I have to say, after a full night of dancing in very high heels, the hot water felt amazing. Before I even had a chance to register much of what was going on, the girls quickly got up and hightailed it into the dark, cavernous room beyond. They all hated the bedroom routine and tried to get it over with as quickly as possible. Tina handed me a pink flannel pajama set to wear, which matched the ones all the other girls were grabbing out of Hef's massive closet area. Yes, Hef's harem wore flannel PJs. How's that for a fantasy? As Tina led me into the bedroom, I stumbled over and weaved through massive piles of junk covering the floor. It appeared that Hef liked to collect more than just women. Ceiling-high piles of videotapes, stuffed animals, art, and gifts littered the room. It was like an episode of Hoarders. But perhaps in his case, hoarders would be spelled Whoreders. Two huge television screens projecting graphic porn lit up the otherwise dark bedroom. In the middle, a very pale man was tending to his own business, if you're catching my thinly veiled innuendo, and puffing on a joint before passing it around to the nearest blonde. The girlfriends, in various stages of undress, were sitting in a semicircle at the edge of the bed, some kneeling, some standing, and some lying down. I sat myself on the edge of the bed, unsure of what to do next. I leaned into Vicky. After all, she was the one I was most comfortable with. Maybe if I hide behind her, I thought, I'll go unnoticed for the night. Fake the fuck, she hissed in my ear and pulled me towards her. I'll explain later. She didn't have to explain. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could see that all the girls, backlit by the large screens, were putting on a show. They were going through the motions as if they were getting it on or making out with each other, but no one really was. It was just a big facade. No one was actually in the mood, besides Hef, I assumed, or turned on in the slightest. Like the porn itself, it was all just for show. There was loud music blaring, but if you got close enough to any of the girls, you could hear them gossiping with one another or making fun of what was going on in front of them. If smartphones had been around back then, I'm pretty sure they would have been texting or checking their Instagram when Hef wasn't looking. Thinking about it now, it's almost comical. Every red-blooded American male has no doubt fantasized about what went on in Hugh Hefner's bedroom with his harem of blonde bombshells. The answer? Not a whole lot. Looking back, I don't know if Hef believed the charade. Truthfully, I don't think he cared one way or the other. Whether it was real or fake, he would be satisfied in knowing that the only reason it was happening at all was for his own personal pleasure. The girlfriends, and Vicky it seemed to me in particular, were desperate to bring as many new girls up into the bedroom as possible. With more fresh meat available for Hef, it was less likely that they'd be called on to have sex with their boyfriend as often. Hef could only keep up with so many girls in a night, so, as I saw it, Vicky had quickly figured out that recruiting new girls effectively achieved two goals at once. Not only would she most likely avoid having to have sex with Hef, but she'd also earn his favor by bringing around pretty new young things for his enjoyment. Of course, at the time I knew none of this. Despite the bimbo label often placed on Hef's harem, some of these girls were quite savvy. Girlfriend politics were serious business, ruthless, calculated, and complex. On that particular night, Candace and I were the newest victims, and it definitely felt to me that our new friend pushed us into the action. Hef, don't you want to be with the new girl? Vicky screamed over the loud music as she reached over and pushed him towards me. Much to my surprise, my turn was over just as quickly as it started. By the time I was able to wrap my head around what was happening, Hef had already moved on to Candace, then to a few of his actual girlfriends, before finishing off by himself, as he always did. I've never had a more disconnected experience. There was zero intimacy involved, no kissing, nothing. It was so brief that I can't even recall what it felt like beyond having a heavy body on top of mine. Even though it was just a few short minutes of my life, I had never taken intimate experiences lightly, so it weighed heavily on me. I was disappointed in myself that it had come to this. Even in my drunken haze, I knew that it was a big decision I would have to live with. Some of the girls leaned over and quickly pecked Hef on the cheek in the same unattached manner that most would probably kiss their grandfather. The girls began filing out of the room, offering Hef a few candy-coated good nights. Quickly, I pulled on my pajamas and followed Vicky down the hall and into her bedroom. I was so wasted that I forgot to grab my club clothes and purse, which were strewn about somewhere on the floor of the master suite. Vicky ordered cheeseburgers and fries to the room as if it were any other night, but I passed out before the food even arrived. Over the years, I would see so many girls come and go through that cavernous master bedroom. I never encouraged anyone to come up there and was often downright cold to some of the girls Hef would invite out with us. It wasn't because I felt threatened or even due to my own embarrassment, but mostly because I didn't want to do to those girls what Vicky had done to me. I had hoped my hard exterior would dissuade them from making my same mistakes. Vicky had tried to act all buddy-buddy, like we were just friends having fun together, like she wanted me to be a part of her club, but I had been used, plain and simple. Unfortunately, it took me a while to realize that. At the time, I wanted to believe that Vicky actually liked me and only pushed Hef towards me because she wanted me to become a girlfriend. Like I said in the beginning, I was naive. The following morning, I woke up feeling terrible, and it wasn't just the hangover. Vicky escorted me back to the master bedroom to help me look for my clothes and purse. And just as if it were any other morning, she gave me a friendly hug goodbye. But I couldn't just leave. I had to find Hef. After asking one of the butlers where he might be, I finally found him in the library busying himself with notes for that Friday night's Mansion movie screening. Before each movie, he always prepared a sort of speech. Hef, can I bother you for a second? I squeaked, my voice breaking mid-sentence. I would quickly adopt this as my go-to pitch when speaking with Hef. The higher octave made it easier for him to hear out of his one good ear. Without even looking up from the pages, he gestured with one hand that I enter his lair. In light of the evening prior, I was even more nervous in his presence than usual. Hef was so used to girls coming in to ask for favors, though, that he didn't seem at all surprised by my impromptu interruption. I had gone from hoping to move into the mansion to downright determined. There was no way I was not going to get what I wanted after having to sleep with him the night before, or rather earlier that morning. In the years that would follow, I noticed that after being intimate with Hef, the new girls fell into one of three categories: the hustler, the runner, or the fighter. Most of the girls that ended up becoming girlfriends reacted the same way. They were very nonchalant about their initiation. Before the sun even rose the following morning, these hustlers were already calculating just how many pennies they could squeeze out of the arrangement. Next, we had the runners. While the hustlers were scheming, the runners were fleeing. Like a hit and run, these girls would bolt from the scene, never to be heard from again. While most, if not all, had hoped to land a pictorial, they disappeared off the face of the planet, never returning for another night out or party despite being invited back. The runners always seemed like inexperienced girls, so I assumed they didn't come back because they didn't like what they had seen or done in Hef's bedroom while under the influence of alcohol, quaaludes, or both. My reaction fell into the third category, the fighters. I was freaked out and frankly ashamed by the experience. After disappointing myself like that, I had to come away with something positive, something to make it right in my mind somehow. I knew that if I couldn't find a silver lining, I couldn't forgive myself for the night before. The other girls who would react as I did were probably the most damaged and affected. We couldn't so easily shrug off what we had been reduced to. It would haunt us, but in order to move forward, we needed to find an upside. For me, asking to move in therefore seemed like the next rational step, or so I convinced myself, and I decided to bite the bullet. After all, it hadn't occurred to me to invite myself out to a club night until prompted, and I had met a very welcoming response, so I figured I might have the same luck with moving in. I was a young blonde girl with a small waist and large boobs, but I wasn't quite as polished as the girls that usually decorated Playboy's pages and hallways. Still, for the most part, I fit the bill of girlfriend. I can do this, I thought. It might be hard to understand, but in that moment, I didn't blame Hef for anything creepy that had gone on the night before. He had the nice guy act down pat, and it worked. At the time, Hef still had a certain swagger. There was a gentlemanly air about him that belied his reputation, and there was never a shortage of Hef's friends lingering around the mansion who were all too eager to remind every pretty young thing that stepped through the doorway what an amazing, kind man Hugh Hefner is. It was easy to fall under the spell. If anything, it was the other girls I felt used by, and I couldn't let them win. "Can I ask you something?" I let out another squeak. He looked up at me for the first time, and I flat out told him I had no place to live. "What do you think about me moving in?" He took a brief moment to consider what I had just asked before finally saying, "You can stay for a while and we'll see how it works out." Chapter 3. "It's really dreadful," she muttered to herself. "The way all the creatures argue. It's enough to drive one crazy." Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. It only took me one trip in my beat-up red Toyota Celica to move my entire life from a tiny Westwood apartment into a Holmby Hills estate. No one offered to move me in, but I didn't really need the help. I didn't have much to bring besides a few outfits I owned, some makeup, my college books, and a handful of childish knickknacks like Disney princess picture frames and Star Wars figurines. I don't even think I owned a curling iron at the time. I left my single twin mattress next to a dumpster. Pulling up the iconic driveway on Charing Cross Road, it couldn't have felt less like home. The gates opened for me, and just like that, I was the newest resident of the Playboy mansion. I pulled my car through the driveway and gave the keys to one of the staffers, who then made a call to one of Hef's secretaries. She directed me to my room and presented me with my room key. Less than an hour later, I had moved my belongings into the bedroom that Hef's secretary designated for me, and that was that. None of the girls even poked their heads out of their bedrooms, let alone offered to help. I was pointed to my room and left alone. Now what? I thought. It was entirely bizarre. I didn't tell many people about my decision to move into the mansion. I quickly learned that not everyone had the most positive reaction. I had naively thought of myself as an adult who was free to make her own decisions, out of high school, away from small town Oregon, and far from the type of people who would judge me for my personal decisions. I was so wrong. When I told Nora I was moving into the Playboy mansion, her jaw dropped so quickly I thought it would hit the ground. Nora was hyper-materialistic and wasn't expecting me to go from rags to riches faster than her. In my excitement, I also told the first acquaintance I had run into while doing errands. His reaction wasn't what I expected either. "You hooked up with an old dude?" he cried, his face scrunching up. "Gross!" All I had said was that I was moving in, nothing about being intimate with anyone. I guess not everyone was as naive as I had been. Seeing the angry look that appeared on my face, he quickly switched gears. "So," he said, his voice much friendlier, "can you get me on the list for the parties?" This guy clearly had no shame. Needless to say, I told him no. After my friend's less than supportive reaction, I was too terrified to tell anyone else. Like many things at the time, I was naive enough to believe that the decisions I made in the relative privacy of that dark cave of a bedroom would remain just that, private. I was by no means prepared for the large scarlet letter that had been branded on my chest. I knew my close friends and family wouldn't approve, but I had already made the decision. Listening to their words of warning and disappointment would only make me feel worse. To be totally honest, I was already ashamed enough, and I wanted to delay any further conversations until I had a better understanding of what my life would be like. Any remaining doubts about my decision vanished when, on an early morning about a week after I had moved in, Vicky stormed into my room screaming, "We've been bombed! We've been bombed!" It was September 11th, 2001. "New York and the Pentagon!" she shrieked. "We've been bombed!" I hobbled into the bathroom feeling sick to my stomach and paralyzed with fear. I imagined that terrorists had bombs aimed at every major city in America. Were we next? In that instant, I couldn't have been more grateful to be inside this great big safe house. Of course, I soon discovered that we hadn't actually been bombed, but the reality was no less scary. Terrorists hijacked 4 American airliners and crashed 2 of them into the World Trade Center towers in lower Manhattan, as well as one into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and one in rural Pennsylvania. Thank God I'm here, I thought. I would have been so much more scared had I been out on my own, couch surfing or worse. The first few nights, I slept in bedroom 3, one of the biggest guest rooms in the mansion with 3 beds and a private bathroom, but like all the other guest rooms in the house, relatively plain. Strangely, it also doubled as a bedroom for Hef's 2 sons, Marston and Cooper, who were 9 and 10 respectively at the time, if they ever were to spend a night in the mansion. Though they never stayed over while I was there were still toys scattered across the bedroom floor, which made for an incredibly odd and frankly creepy juxtaposition. April was also residing in bedroom 3, and she intimidated the hell out of me. She was taller and bigger boned than Hef's usual type and had an in your face personality. I had heard that she used to be a stripper, even though Playboy has a somewhat hypocritical no stripper policy when it comes to Hef's idea of the wholesome playmate image. She also had a constant need to be the center of attention and would do whatever she needed to keep the spotlight on her, no matter how raunchy. She also made zero effort to hide the fact that she felt I was intruding on her space. That week, another girlfriend, Adriana, announced her departure. It was assumed that April would move into her old room, bedroom 5, and I would be staying in the shared room. April was new to the mansion herself, but since she had moved in several months before me, still had seniority when it came to rooms. Bedroom 5 was one of the smallest rooms, but it was private. And as I would quickly learn, privacy was key when it came to surviving the mansion mayhem. April, however, had another idea. She asked Hef if she could have bedroom 3 to herself. The mansion was not without its fair share of politics, and when it came to the girlfriends, you had to put in your time and work your way up the totem pole when it came to certain privileges, particularly rooms. New girls who immediately began demanding certain luxuries were seen as pushy or ungrateful. Bedroom 3 was meant to house 3 girls. April scoring it for herself would have been a major coup. Surprisingly, Hef approved her request. I moved out later that day, along with the toys. For months to come, April complained that Marston and Cooper were hostile towards her for taking over their room. I must say, I couldn't really blame them. April taking bedroom 3 meant that I would be moving into bedroom 5. I couldn't have been more thrilled to be getting the privacy of my own room in my very first week at the mansion. The arrangement wasn't without its downside, though. Bedroom 5 shared a bathroom with Vicky's room. Little did I know that she had a love of laxatives that made sharing a bathroom with thin walls pretty disturbing. It was standard practice for girls to redecorate their rooms when accepting an offer to move in, but I was grateful simply to have a roof over my head. Even if I had wanted to redecorate, I would have been disappointed. Hef's idea of redecorating a girl's room meant replacing the carpet, which he always insisted on being white, despite all the dogs constantly relieving themselves everywhere, and having the walls repainted. The girl could choose the color, as long as it was one of the chalky matte pastel shades he favored. All of the bedrooms contained mismatched, beat-up furniture. Bedroom 5 had an old wooden dresser tucked into one corner, a small TV mounted on the wall, and a bed so large that there wasn't much space left to move around the floor. Faded pink curtains covered the small windows that looked out onto 4 parking spots next to the outdoor kitchen. There was a tiny walk-in closet that housed the few clothing items I owned, plus a black Playboy brand dress Adriana had left behind. Clearly, I had a clothing complex and was terrified that I would quickly run out of club-appropriate attire, so finding this little black dress was a huge relief. But that wasn't Adriana's only parting gift. She had also worked as a Hawaiian tropic girl, and we had met on a few occasions before she had moved in. While we were by no means close, she made it a point to find me before she left to wish me well. When I asked her why she was choosing to leave, she said, "I don't really feel like it's the right thing for me anymore." I know you're just moving in, but this place can be kind of rough, Adriana went on, offering me just a bit of warning. At the time, I wasn't quite sure what she meant, but I later learned that since she scored a centerfold almost immediately, the other girls were pretty hideous to her. My first day in bedroom 5 was quiet and uneventful. I remember it was a Thursday, which was the only night of the week there was nothing planned on Hef's agenda. When I asked Vicky if she wouldn't mind filling me in on the schedule, she acted as if it were some big annoyance. It's not like anyone handed you a pamphlet when you walk through the door, and I was terrified that my trial period would come to an abrupt end, so I wanted to make sure I was playing by all the rules. I chalked it up to a bad mood, but she didn't seem that excited to have me as a neighbor. After some coaxing, she finally offered me the rundown. Monday was manly night. Hef would have his guy friends over for a buffet dinner and a movie in the mansion's screening room. Tuesday was family night. Hef's wife and 2 sons, who lived next door in a house Hef had purchased for them, would come over to all spend time together. Wednesday and Friday were club nights. We were all expected to be ready by 10 p.m. to be shuttled off with Hef to exclusive nightclubs all around Los Angeles. Thursday, like Monday and Tuesday, was an off night. While we had the evenings free to do as we pleased, the girlfriends were still required to be inside mansion walls by 9 p.m. Saturday was a buffet dinner and movie with Hef. Sunday was the Fun in the Sun pool party during the day and dinner and a movie at night. No one gave me a tour of the mansion when I arrived either. I knew my way around the grounds and most of the main house, but for weeks I kept discovering new places on the property. There was an underground secret passage that led from the main house to the gym, which was in the basement level of the bathhouse. The mansion itself had a large basement full of employee lockers, storage closets, and laundry facilities. A panel in the wall of the living room could pop out to reveal a secret wine cellar, which was used as a speakeasy in the 1920s when the house was built. The master bedroom had an attic level where Hef kept a personal office of sorts. The adjacent bathroom truly looked like a time capsule or the land that time forgot. Gold shag rug covered the floor. A tray of toiletries from the 1970s sat untouched on the counter. The sink handles were carved to look like naked ladies. There was a 4-bedroom guest house on the grounds that hosted playmates and playmate candidates when they were brought in from out of town to shoot at Playboy Studio West in Santa Monica. I assumed the Playmate guest house would be plush and clean like a hotel, with perhaps some Playmate memorabilia strewn about to give it a sense of atmosphere. In reality, the guest house could have been described as Grandma's attic meets rent by the hour motel. In the 70s, Hef's girlfriend Barbie Benton had decorated the guest house as a charming, early American cottage, but over the years the theme fell apart. What was left was dark, dingy, and depressing. There were many rules to living in the mansion, but most of them I had to figure out on my own. Like I said, no one handed me the Playboy mansion for dummies when I arrived. I also learned that the other girlfriends weren't so eager to help out the newbies, since it was in their best interest for us to stumble around in order to make all of them look better. First, there was a curfew. For being an older man, Hef stayed up reasonably late, usually tucking in around 11 p.m., but he required his girlfriends in by 9 p.m. Apparently, we couldn't get into too much mischief outside the walls before that hour. I had been present once when Vicky and Lisa had rolled in a half hour past curfew and got a major dressing down from Hef, no pun intended. He kicked his feet, mustered up some questionable crocodile tears. Was he really crying, I thought? And told them that if they wanted to stay out late, they could move out. Needless to say, his temper tantrum made a lasting impression on me. Next, the girlfriends were not allowed to fraternize with the staff unless absolutely necessary. The rule was not to be taken lightly. Hef would totally lose it if he caught one of us talking with anybody on the service team, and I eventually witnessed his irrational freak out firsthand when future girlfriend Kendra Wilkinson spent too much time in the butler's pantry. According to mansion lore, there were 2 instances of girls having relations with mansion staffers. First, his ex-wife allegedly had an affair with one of the members of the security team, and Hef found out. Second, one of the girlfriends had supposedly been caught sleeping with a butler. Now, I can't prove that either of those things happened, but it would explain why he was so overly sensitive about this particular rule. In the beginning, I'm sure the staffers thought I was terribly aloof and cold, but I was honestly just scared shitless. If I got kicked out, I had nowhere to go. I couldn't risk it. Each girlfriend was given a weekly clothing allowance of $1,000 for expenses. It was expected that we use this money to purchase clothing to wear for evening events, as well as beauty treatments, hair, nails, waxing, etc., that weren't covered by his in-house account at Jose Bear Salon in Beverly Hills. This was a welcome relief for me. It was clear that Hef preferred we dress in a particular way when we were out on the town with him, and I was desperate to revamp my wardrobe, and fast. Hef made it abundantly clear that he preferred us in very over-the-top, sort of trashy outfits. Think bedazzled rhinestone boots. Dazzled rhinestone bustiers and skirts so short there was barely a point in wearing them. When he would compliment a girl on a particular dress, pair of shoes, or even the way she wore her hair, we all felt the need to replicate it for our next evening out. The last major requirement was that girlfriends attend the events designated on Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. While the girlfriends were always eager to party at the hottest Hollywood nightclubs on Wednesdays and Fridays, it was clear they used whatever excuse they could to get out of dinner and the movie nights. Oftentimes, it would just be April and me flanking Hef at the main dining table. We were still the two newest girls, so paying our dues was part of the program. The other girls stayed out until 9 p.m. on the nose, not wanting to miss even a single minute of freedom, which usually meant visiting the boyfriends that they kept on the side. How these side boyfriends felt about their girlfriends dating Hugh Hefner, I don't know. I imagine the girls weren't forthcoming with these men and probably denied that they even had sex with Hef. They denied it to everyone. Most of them referred to dating Hef as a big publicity stunt to help them launch their careers. Maybe some of the guys got a perverted little kick out of the fact that they were dating the same girl as Hugh Hefner. Who knows? Contrary to popular belief, most nights at the mansion were pretty boring. We usually ended up in one of the bedrooms gossiping or watching TV. One night, Lisa was hanging out in Vicky's room and the doors to our connecting bathrooms were open. When Tina came to visit, I went into Vicky's room to try and make an effort to be friendly with the other girls. Tina was excitedly talking about her boyfriend, and like the socially awkward person I was, I asked her, "Do you feel like he even takes you seriously when you live with Hef?" My intention wasn't to be mean. I actually wanted these girls to like me. I was genuinely curious. When I shared the news that I'd be moving into the mansion, I hadn't met the warmest response, so I wondered how everyone else's friends, families, and even boyfriends felt about it. Tina whipped her head in my direction and snapped a dismissive response at me. I grimaced and tried to apologize, but Tina wouldn't even look at me. She just rolled her eyes at Vicky. As you could have predicted, Tina's boyfriend didn't stick around long. In fact, none of the side boyfriends ever stayed longer than a few months at most. I don't think the men took them seriously. I always assumed most men were just using the girls to check some Playboy bunny fantasy off their bucket list. I only ever saw one side boyfriend stick around, Hank Basket. Following the rules wasn't difficult for me. I didn't know too many people in Los Angeles, and I quickly cut out the small group of friends I did have, either because I didn't want to be subjected to their judgment or because they started to call asking for invites to the mansion and other favors I couldn't grant. Plus, I've always been a bit of a homebody and much preferred the delicious home-cooked meals the staff provided to dancing the night away at nightclubs, where I would usually get pretty drunk purely out of sheer boredom. Most of the girls would have rather died than sit around the dining table with men 3 times their age, but I found Hef's friends funny and interesting and genuinely enjoyed listening to all of their stories. Eventually, I would convince myself that this was yet another component of the common ground Hef and I shared as a couple. Usually, the movie nights included a steady rotation of Hef's favorite classic films, and I adore old movies, something we were truly starting to bond over. Every Sunday night, Hef's office would arrange to have studios bring in movies that were still in theaters, and armed guards would enter the mansion with giant film cans to screen the newest Hollywood blockbuster for us. It was pretty cool, but it was also sort of bizarre because oftentimes celebrities or other important Hollywood power players would join us for the screenings and be relegated to spending roughly 2 hours squirming in uncomfortable metal folding chairs. For being a super upscale home, it wasn't without its downscale touches. One of the most memorable was the tray of Johnson's baby oil, Vaseline, and Kleenex that was in every bathroom, in the grotto, and at the tennis courts and the pool bar. I still don't know whether to be disgusted or amused by those trays. At first, my constant attendance at all of the events deemed boring by the other girls earned me a bit of good grace with them. They felt that I took some of the attention off their recurring absences while they busied about with their outside lives. Girls would find crafty ways to sneak out past curfew when they thought it wouldn't be noticed, like hiding in the trunk of someone's car as they drove off and onto the property. While evenings at the mansion were pretty regimented, during the day we were virtually free to do as we pleased. Hef was usually awake by 10 a.m. for breakfast, then meandered down the hall to his office wing where he would work on the magazine, various book projects, and other business. He wouldn't emerge again until the evening. In the beginning, I spent most days with Brittany, a nice girl that I had met at the Sunday pool parties. We'd go to the gym, tan, lay by the pool, and cruise around LA searching for bargain clothes. The only other girl I remember spending time with was Lisa. Besides me, Lisa was the youngest girlfriend in the group at that time. She lived in bedroom 2, the largest of the bedrooms, and was still celebrating the release of the issue in which she was the centerfold. She was a cute country girl who, according to the other girls, dated Kid Rock on the side, though I never saw any evidence of it. She had first auditioned for Playboy over a year prior to her Playmate pictorial finally being published. Somewhere along the way, she met Hef, became a girlfriend, and secured a centerfold after acquiring a new set of Hef-financed breast implants to lift the mammaries that he deemed too droopy for a Playmate. Like most of the other girlfriends, she was both manipulative and manipulated. Becoming a published centerfold didn't happen overnight. In fact, Playmate features were often shot 8 to 12 months before they actually hit newsstands. According to Vicky, Lisa had been a girlfriend for several months before losing patience. She threw a fit when we were out one night asking when she was going to finally shoot her centerfold, Vicky once explained to me, rolling her eyes and exhaling cigarette smoke. She's the baby. She always gets what she wants. This is like a boy band, my friend Brittany added. Hef has to have an old one, a young one, a wild one. This brought a cackle out of Vicky, who rolled her eyes. He always plays the oldest one against the youngest one, Vicky explained, eager to share her expertise on the topic as we gossiped about the situation. Tina may be his main girlfriend, but she's older, so he likes to play on her insecurities by playing favorites with whoever the youngest one is. And Lisa isn't special. Before her, he used Buffy to play against Tina. I took note of this, but at the time I didn't want to believe a man as old and accomplished as Hef could be that petty and immature. Vicky was starting to show her nasty side, so I wrote it off as jealousy on her part. Lisa was one of the friendlier girlfriends. In fact, when I walked by her room one morning, she called me in. Hey, want to go to Target with me later? I need to run some errands. Yeah, sure, let me know what time, I said, feeling lucky to be invited. I was hoping she could fill me in a little more on how things worked around the mansion, since Vicky and the others had given me the cold shoulder. Ugh, I need to get lipo, Lisa croaked, looking down at her belly and pinching her spare tire. She was adorable, but had been told to lose weight by a Playboy photo editor. No, you don't, I said. You look fine. Thanks, she replied through a toothy grin. As I knelt down to pet one of her 3 dogs, she picked up the phone next to her bed, pressed 0 for the butler's pantry, and ordered a piece of chocolate cake and a glass of chocolate milk for breakfast. Was I in the Twilight Zone? Plastic surgery was so commonplace for these women that liposuction sprung to mind as the obvious weight loss cure before, say, taking chocolate cake out of your breakfast routine. Hang out here while I get ready, Lisa demanded while hopping into the bathroom. After chattering about herself for 10 minutes, her cake was finally delivered. She thanked the butler, plopped the tray down on her bed, started shoveling cake in her mouth, and asked, "So, how do you like it here so far?" Finally, someone I can talk to, I thought with relief. Now was a good time to ask a few questions and confess a few of my insecurities about this wild world I had just entered. I confided in Lisa that I wasn't too fond of April, that she really intimidated me. "That's okay, the rest of us don't like her either," Lisa stated, wrinkling up her nose. "Hef just likes her because she's wild." "Oh, wow, thank God it's not just me," I sighed, feeling relieved. Maybe April wouldn't last that long, and then we could all really be like sorority sisters, all on the same team. Feeling more and more comfortable with Lisa, I thought I would ask her opinion about something that had started worrying me the past few days. "Hef hasn't given me a bunny necklace yet," I admitted meekly. "Do you think that's weird?" Every playmate and every girlfriend was presented with a bunny pendant necklace from Hef. At the time, I, along with everyone else in LA's 30-mile zone, thought these necklaces were made with real diamonds. They had looked so glamorous, glittering on the chests of the chosen ones who flitted about the Playboy parties, the hottest nightclubs, and the spendiest shopping districts in LA. In reality, the pendants were cubic zirconia, and if you could track down the downtown LA jeweler who made them, anyone could purchase one for just $100. My interest in acquiring a necklace had nothing to do with its value, however. Sure, I coveted one, but my worry stemmed from what it symbolized. Hef's words echoed in my mind. "You can stay for a while and we'll see how it works out." Maybe I wasn't making the cut. That had to be why he hadn't graced me with a necklace yet. In the few weeks I had been there, he had presented one to Cheris Boyle, an upcoming centerfold, whom he had met after me. Somehow I had been skipped over. "Oh, he hasn't?" Lisa asked, feigning amazement. "Oh, yeah, I don't know why that is," she purred as she put down her fork and sauntered back into the bathroom. I felt a knot form in my stomach. That was definitely not the reaction I had hoped for. Lisa's sisterly vibe had me hoping she would reassure me that this was normal, or perhaps even offer to ask for me. After all, she seemed so comfortable around Hef and was certainly good at getting whatever she wanted. As Lisa readied herself for the day and led me down to her car, my mind was in turmoil. Was my time here almost over? I had barely been at the mansion 2 weeks, and already I didn't seem to be making the cut. What would I do now? As it turns out, I wasn't the only one with these kinds of anxieties. As we wound our way through LA traffic down to Target in Culver City, Lisa kept babbling about herself. I found her stream of consciousness narrative fascinating as her anxieties mirrored mine. The only difference was that she had been here longer and had a centerfold under her belt. "See this?" she bragged, holding up her checkbook for me to see the balance, which hovered just above $25,000. "It's the money I earned doing my Playmate pictorial," she exclaimed proudly. "I haven't touched a penny. You know, the other girls aren't even thinking. They have Hef leasing them cars they could never afford, and they spend money like there's no tomorrow." She looked pleased with herself. "Everyone made fun of me for getting this car," she said, patting the steering wheel of her brand new Toyota RAV4. "But I want something I can afford after I move out. I don't need a Porsche." Smart, I thought. In fact, it was the first sensible thing I had heard out of any of the girlfriends' mouths so far. As we roamed through Target, she filled her shopping cart with everything from a nose hair trimmer to dog toys. "I always spend so much at Target," she sighed. "You always walk out of here with more than you need." I smiled and nodded my head in agreement. Before another pause could pass, Lisa started babbling again. "You know, I don't know if I could ever go back home," Lisa continued. "One of my guy friends from home, the other day he got real rude with me on the phone and said the only reason I got centerfold was because I fucked Hef." I wasn't 100% sure if she was even talking to me anymore or just thinking out loud. She shrugged her shoulders and tried to offer a half-hearted smirk, but I could tell the comment bothered her deeply. I could certainly relate. Like me, I think she got into this situation without quite realizing what a public decision it was. "It's not true, you're gorgeous," I offered, trying to cheer her up. "You could have become a centerfold anyway." And it was true. She was curvy, cute, and baby-faced, resembling a petite version of Anna Nicole Smith. "Thanks," she sighed, offering a weak smile. But I can't go back home. I mean, what am I supposed to do? I'm not above working a real job, but like if I'm working at a counter somewhere, everyone I know is going to come up and be like, "Ooh, Lisa, look where you are now after posing naked." It's embarrassing. I was just as anxious as Lisa was about the life that waited for me outside the mansion gates. So many things seemed to be grounds for dismissal that I was petrified to step out of line. While becoming an actress was still a passion of mine, it was always best to keep any auditions quiet. After Brandy Roderick had left Hef for Baywatch Hawaii, he kept a much closer eye on any acting work the girlfriends tried to pursue. I secretly hoped to land a role big enough that it would allow me to leave the mansion after a few months, but those kinds of dream jobs are few and far between. Eventually, I would receive offers for smaller parts in music videos and low budget films, but the hours often went past our curfew and the jobs rarely paid much, so they hardly seemed worth it. If anything, they would only land me in hot water with my boyfriend, who, as the weeks passed into months, appeared more and more controlling. It seemed my acting dreams were stalling for the time being. I felt caught between a rock and a hard place. I thought having a rent-free roof over my head would make chasing my dreams so much easier, but that wasn't turning out to be the case. I had managed to hold on to my day shifts at Hooters for a few months. I guess Hef didn't feel particularly threatened by a lowly waitressing job, and I was able to slowly start paying off the debt I had amassed in college. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As they do every year, Hooters chooses a waitress from each region to be featured in the Hooters magazine and participate in their national bikini contest. One day, the general manager called me into her office and told me that Hooters wanted me to represent Santa Monica. I was very flattered. There were so many beautiful girls that worked at the restaurant, and they had chosen me. My friend Roxy had been chosen the year before and had told me how much fun it was and how many people she had met. I was still hoping to break into the entertainment world and was eager to take any opportunity, even if it was just a pageant title. "No," Hef said when I told him about the offer and asked permission to leave for 2 days. I expected him to maybe pout a bit, but I wasn't really anticipating a flat out no. Hef never seemed bothered by my job, and since he wasn't eager to feature me in Playboy, I couldn't imagine why he would care about me being in another magazine, especially since there was never anything racier than a bikini photo in the Hooters magazine. "You can't do it!" he shouted, pounding his fists on his desk. His voice became irrationally loud. "Why?" I asked. I had already agreed to do it and was totally perplexed by the strange tantrum he was throwing. "Because you working there makes me jealous," he yelled, his hands flying in the air, doing his best to well up some more fake tears. In the months I worked at Hooters, Hef never once expressed feeling threatened by my being there. But now that I was getting an offer to do something fun, something that made me feel special, he all of a sudden had an issue with it. The timing was a little too convenient. Hef was waiting for me to argue or cry, but I just stood silently in front of his desk. I could see the anxiety creep across his face. He didn't know how to read my non-reaction, so he took it a step further. "I don't want you working there while you're living in this house," he shouted, hoping this would evoke some response. He thrived on this kind of drama. He was half hoping for me to surrender and half hoping for a fight. Without saying a word and as stoically as possible, I turned around and saw myself out of his office. Inside, I was crushed, but I was trying to keep my dignity. The next day, with a heavy heart, I called the general manager and let her know that not only could I not attend the pageant, I was quitting my job as well. Honestly, I can't even remember what I said. It was a crushing defeat, and it felt like I was saying goodbye to a part of me. In hindsight, that incident should have been a blaring indicator of what my life was going to be like behind those gates, but I still had high hopes. I felt like my last shred of independence was gone. But at that point, I thought I'd seen the worst of it. It wasn't an ideal world, but I could make it work. I could find some happiness here while I figured out my next move, I reasoned with myself. After all, it would only be a few months, maybe a year at most. Chapter 4. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. Lewis Carroll, Alice Through the Looking Glass. You girls are basically Hef's traveling harem, right? Asked the eager New York Magazine reporter, sticking a small silver voice recorder in my face. Only a few weeks after I had moved into the mansion, Hef whisked us away on a trip to New York City for his Comedy Central's Friars Club roast. I'd never been to New York before. I'd actually never been off the West Coast before. It seemed so surreal and slightly absurd that a reporter would be questioning me about my life with Hugh Hefner. I began through a short laugh. I wasn't quite sure how to respond to this older, bespectacled journalist with the practical brown bob. Despite what the nature of the event may suggest, I couldn't be certain if she was joking or not. This particular roast had special meaning to New Yorkers. In the wake of the September 11th tragedy, a dark cloud hovered over New York, and the entire country for that matter. Comedy Central reasoned that giving people an hour of time to laugh again might help kickstart the healing process, and they decided to move forward with Hef's scheduled roast. The day before the event, Hef, his girlfriends, and his staff, including his longtime assistant Mary O'Connor, his personal photographer, and a team of security, boarded a chartered private jet at Van Nuys Airport and headed to New York. The network hosted us at the New York Hilton Midtown. Hef and Tina occupied the hotel's regal presidential suite, while the rest of us were given gorgeous rooms with breathtaking views of the city. Whose life was I living? Private jets, luxury hotels. Last month, I was barely making rent on a shitty shared apartment. There were many perks to being one of Hugh Hefner's girlfriends, including the VIP treatment everywhere we went. I'll be honest, being treated like royalty wasn't necessarily a hard routine to fall into. Sure, it was mainly directed at Hef, and we were considered ornamental, but reaping the benefits of his celebrity certainly had its moments. Prior to the festivities, Hef was expected to walk the red carpet with his 7 girlfriends for brief press interviews and to pose for photographers. The attire was black tie, so each girlfriend packed her most glamorous cocktail dress or pantsuit. With my clothing allowance, I was able to buy a retro-style Betsy Johnson black and white ball gown. I loved it, but I felt a little out of place after I realized how conservative my poofy below-the-knee dress looked next to the other girls' tighter and more revealing ensembles. When we arrived in our stretch limo to the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, my heart fell into my stomach. I'd never been to an event like this in my life, let alone on the arm of the guest of honor. As we piled on each side of Hef for photographs outside the ballroom, I began shadowing the other girlfriends. Terrified to make any kind of noticeable mistake, I mimicked the girls who appeared to be veterans at this point. Like the other 6, I plastered on my brightest smile and stood patiently behind Hef as he conducted one interview after the other. I had to watch my step, though. Simply falling into place in line didn't work for the other girls. One girlfriend, Carolyn, shamelessly shoved me out of the way so she could stand closer to Hef. Because we were in front of the press, all of a sudden being as close as possible to Hef was really important to all of the girls, who normally couldn't be farther away. When the New York Magazine reporter shoved her device under my nose, I was taken off guard. I didn't want to seem unfriendly or rude, so I answered her questions as politely as possible and excused myself to follow the rest of the girlfriends into the ballroom. "What did that reporter ask you?" Vicky hissed as I sat down at the large banquet table closest to the stage. "She asked me if we were a harem that travels with Hef." I let out a small laugh. To me, it was just a silly-sounding question. "What did you say?" Vicky asked me, her eyes like slits. I just sort of laughed and said, "Well, I guess so," I told her, a smile still stuck on my face, completely unaware that I might have done something wrong. I didn't take the question literally. When she said harem, I just thought she meant an ornamental group of women, not sex slaves. I had only been around a few weeks. How was I supposed to know how to answer a question like that? I'd never spoken to a reporter in my life. "No," Vicky spat at me, exasperated. "Don't ever say that we sleep with him. We always tell people that only Tina does that." I could see that I rattled her pretty hard. As Hef took his throne on stage, Vicky spent the rest of the evening ignoring me and whispering to the other girlfriends in between venomous glances. She'd clearly misled me in the beginning. I guess I shouldn't have been so shocked that she was trying to mislead others, too. But exactly who did she think she was fooling? The irony wasn't at all lost on me that the entirety of the evening consisted of sex jokes implying that Hef was intimate with each of the 7 blondes sitting at his feet. "I've read just about every issue of Playboy since I was 15 years old," began the host, Jimmy Kimmel. "And not once did I see a playmate say that one of her turn-ons was fucking a 75-year-old man." Inside the mansion, life wasn't at all like what I dreamed it would be. Instead of a nightly slumber party with 6 of your best friends, I had entered the lion's den. It gave a whole new meaning to the phrase, "keep your enemies close," and made a sorority house look like Bible study. By the time I had arrived, fewer and fewer opportunities were being offered to girlfriends to appear in the magazine, which meant the pack was getting restless. Over the years, Hef had become wiser to the girls' true motivations. After achieving playmate status, they no longer found it necessary to stay at the mansion, or with Hef. The truly gilded age of Playboy had long since passed, and our nightly rituals felt more Golden Girls than Playboy Club. Girls stuck around on the off chance that they'd one day become a playmate or until a better option came along, and Hef knew it. He decided he wasn't going to make any more of his girlfriend's playmates, but he never told that to anyone. He dangled the possibility of playmatehood in order to keep the girls interested. The more aggressive girlfriends would take whatever measures necessary to secure a centerfold, even ruthlessly throwing another girl under the bus if that meant she would gain favor with him. As always, Vicky was eager to bring as many girls up to the bedroom as possible. I could guess her reasoning. The more options Hef had, the less likely she'd be called to duty. It seemed to me that she made it her mission to lure every new playmate up to the bedroom to pay their dues. In those first few years, I would say the majority of the playmates eventually selected had found their way into Hef's bedroom. I guess Vicky figured that if she had to sleep with Hef, they all should have to sleep with him. I was too naive to realize it at the time, but Hef was the catalyst for all the drama I was to experience at the mansion. He recognized that some of the girls were warming up to me and began to use my perfect attendance as one of his many tools to manipulate and control his wild pack. Pitting the girlfriends against one another created an aggressive, competitive atmosphere where he alone benefited. During one of my first nights at the mansion, the girlfriends had banded together on a Friday evening and told Hef they didn't feel like going out that night. I was the newest member of the crew, so I just sat there observing the confrontation. "So, what do I say to my party posse?" he said, throwing up his hands and wearing the most disappointed look ever on his face. "Sorry, Hef," Lisa said. "We'll go out next week." Needless to say, Hef decided then and there that the girlfriend's days of being chummy were over. After all, he couldn't be outnumbered, could he? It was in his best interest to have us wallowing in our own insecurities and pawing for his acceptance. Girlfriends that didn't get along gave him the feeling of being fought over, and being fought over made him feel desired, something he was desperate to feel in his old age. A stable environment among the girlfriends wasn't much fun for him, so he began using me as a means to reprimand them. "Why can't you just be a good girl like Holly?" Hef bemoaned to a girlfriend who wanted a curfew extension, knowing full well that his small remark would pin a bullseye on my back for weeks. They began resenting me for the very reason they initially accepted me. A few weeks into my residency, it was obvious that Vicky was regretting the role she played in recruiting me into the fold. Initially, Vicky must have thought that she could use what little relationship I had with Adriana to her advantage. Hef was totally smitten with Adriana, who looked like a perfect, fresh-faced beach bunny. So Vicky, who was as mean as a snake, must have thought that I would have some useful information she could use to help take her competition down. Since Adriana had moved out of the mansion, it was clear to me that my presence was no longer of use to Vicky. I think she continued to deal with me because she considered me average-looking compared to the rest of the girlfriends. They all tried the best they could to recreate that ideal of Pamela Anderson. I, on the other hand, wasn't interested in transforming myself into a spearmint rhino version of the Baywatch beauty. I wanted to look good enough to be a playmate, but still hold on to some of what made me unique, and frankly, avoid looking like a blow-up doll. But as soon as Hef started using me as a behavioral example, Vicky no longer wanted anything to do with me. Today, trying to recall how particularly hideously some of the girlfriends treated me is a bit difficult. I liken it to being the dorky girl in the lunchroom who eats her sandwich quietly with her nose buried deep in a book, praying she didn't attract the unwanted attention of the popular kids. That's sort of how I felt, but unlike that little girl at school, I couldn't look forward to weekends or nights free from these mean girls. I lived with them. Prior to moving into the mansion, I'd been a fairly confident person, but it didn't take long for my self-worth to start to crumble. After being identified by the other girlfriends as persona non grata, I had become the victim of their ruthless mean girling. During dinners or movie screenings, it wasn't out of the ordinary for me to overhear their loud whispers criticizing my appearance, my hair, my face, my clothes. According to their ruthless taunting, I was the hick girl from Nowheresville, USA. They found my optimistic attitude corny and my confidence threatening, so they did whatever they could to tear me down. Sadly, I have to say it worked. Any playmates or playmate candidates they befriended would join in, mocking me as well. Hef's hearing was already pretty deteriorated, so like him, I acted as if I did not hear their harsh remarks. My silence only further incited them, and their attacks became more vicious. Once I started acquiring a decent wardrobe, my clothing began mysteriously disappearing. When I would send things downstairs to be laundered, they would never make their way back. As a gift, each girlfriend was given a gorgeous embroidered burgundy silk robe. We all sent ours to be cleaned before an upcoming event, but only mine went missing. I reverted to writing my name on the inside of each label like a third grader going away to camp, but even that wasn't really any kind of insurance policy. I quickly learned that complaining about the girls' antics served zero purpose. You know the phrase, don't shoot the messenger? Well, Hef loved to shoot the messenger. He would make sure to twist any complaint around into my own doing, and I'd end up apologizing to him. He cultivated an environment where we were perpetually indebted to him. My priority became remaining in his good graces. Regardless, whenever Hef was around, I stayed close to his heels. Even though his presence didn't necessarily protect me from their bullying, I somehow felt safer. The mean girls couldn't be as obvious for fear that he might turn his wrath on them. 2 months into my mansion residency, I finally got to attend my first Playboy party as a girlfriend. With my clothing allowance, I was able to go to Trashy Lingerie, a popular boutique, to pick out my costume. Despite its name, it was way out of my price range before. I chose a frilly Alice in Wonderland costume that came with a purse shaped like a slice of cake with "Eat Me" written cheekily on it in white puffy paint. The outfit was supposed to be sexy, but once again I had chosen something quite conservative compared to the body-hugging ensembles the other girlfriends chose. When it came to public events and appearances, there was a protocol for the girlfriends to follow. Each of us was expected to meet Hef in his room so we could all make our grand entrance into the party together. It wasn't as exclusive as it might sound, as many of the girlfriends brought their female friends who joined us for our entrance. Everyone was dressed in something skin tight: a spandex clad race car driver, a spandex clad taxi driver, and a few spandex clad cops. By comparison, I felt like a giant frilly cream puff. When the time came to walk downstairs, we all trailed down the grand staircase slowly, with Hef's house camera crew filming every moment for posterity. Hef trailed behind us, wearing the black and white striped prisoner of love jailbird costume he wore every year. When we arrived at the foot of the stairs, we were instructed to line up in 2 rows so Hef's house photographer could take our group portrait. After the short photo session was finished, I followed the group out into the tented backyard and towards Hef's table next to the dance floor. On our way out, a naked woman, clad only in body paint, shoved a tray in front of me. "Jello shot?" she asked. "Don't mind if I do," I said with a smile, grabbing a green one off her tray. "The red ones are the best," Vicky snapped at me with a cold smile as soon as I reached Hef's table with my green shot in hand. She was right. The red ones did taste the best. Never having had a Jello shot before, I was amazed at how delicious they were and clueless at how potent they were. Needless to say, I got wasted. Fast. The girlfriends pretty much ignored my existence the whole night, so luckily I spotted some of my old Hooters friends and motioned for them to come over and talk to me. The novelty of my position as Hef's newest girlfriend hadn't worn off yet, so everyone had plenty of questions, the less polite of which I dodged with non answers. As girlfriends, the protocol was that we stay at Hef's table all night. We could get up and dance as long as we stayed on the dance floor in front of the table. The only time we were allowed to leave was to go to the bathroom. There were times when some of the girls managed to get away for short periods of time due to the fact that Hef was so distracted by all the partygoers clamoring for his attention. Star fucking was a priority for most of the girls, so they tried to sneak away and meet as many famous men as possible. One of the biggest running jokes among the girls was when a girlfriend, who owned a pet capuchin monkey she liked to tote around for attention, took Jennifer Lopez's ex-husband Chris Judd up to her room to show him her monkey. When Hef was ready to leave the party, usually around 1 a.m., we had to go upstairs with him. Of course, there were always girlfriends who snuck back down to the parties after Hef was asleep to chase men or hobnob with celebrities, but they were always very discreet about it. After all, Hef's videographers wandered the parties until the wee hours, capturing all the goings on, and none of the girls wanted to get caught on tape. By the next afternoon, Hef's video department would have a tape sitting outside Hef's door with a highlight reel from the last night's party, copies of which would be sent to local news stations. So much for what happens at the mansion stays at the mansion. That year, Playboy would collaborate with Girls Gone Wild to release a DVD titled Playboy Mansion Parties Uncensored. The DVD, a compilation of all kinds of random party footage, including nudity and celebrity sightings, flew off the shelves. The effect that particular business venture had on the brand was questionable, however. The overeagerness of Playboy to exploit what went on at the mansion parties dirtied the cachet of these events that were once considered exclusive and glamorous. No longer feeling like their privacy was being respected, fewer and fewer A-list celebrities wanted to attend anymore. Understandably so. The night ended with me passed out on my bedroom floor with a cheeseburger in my lap. It had become clear to me that being part of Hugh Hefner's party posse wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. This was a far cry from what I pictured life here would be like when I first laid eyes on the gorgeous Bentley twins a year and a half earlier at the Midsummer Night's Dream party. The situation was also much lonelier than I could have ever imagined, not to mention more stressful. The day-to-day stress of mansion life had taken such a toll on me that I could feel myself mentally regressing. My memory started to dull, and things I used to know with certainty started to fade from my mind. I've always considered myself an intelligent girl, but I could feel myself getting dumber and began second-guessing everything. That might sound insane, but I suppose you are the company you keep. And let's just say the other 6 girlfriends weren't necessarily winning any spelling bees. I was so constantly on edge that I eventually developed a stammer when speaking, so I tried as best I could to stay quiet and not risk the embarrassment of tripping over sentences. To Hef, my shrinking violet personality was a sign of submission that he used to manipulate the other women. It helped my rise through the girlfriend ranks to become one of Hef's favorites. Over time, I convinced myself that I did actually care for this man, that I wanted to be in a relationship with him despite the fact that I didn't really know him. Of course, living with someone, you learn things about their personalities, their tics and their annoyances. But Hef and I never really talked, not about things that mattered. There were no deep conversations or romance between us. As far as his girlfriends were concerned, we were better seen and not heard. His friends were there for his intellectual stimulation. My job was to show up and look pretty. Even our daily dialogue was superficial. If ever I tried to speak to him about books, politics, or world events, he would scoff at whatever I said. It didn't matter if my remark was educated or even correct, because if I said it, it must be wrong. During movie nights, he would lean over to me to explain plot lines and time periods in the most condescending of ways. Oftentimes, I would have to bite my tongue. It was all I could do to keep from screaming, "I know!" Clearly, he was used to or preferred a woman with no more than a grade school level education. But I was young and blinded by his fame and accomplishments. What wasn't to love about Hef, I told myself. Because of his generosity, I was living on this gorgeous estate, attending swanky Hollywood parties, and had money to spend on clothes, shoes, hair, and makeup. So I reasoned with myself that no two people are exactly the same. Of course, we won't see eye to eye on everything, I thought. With that in mind, I began only noticing his good qualities. He was smart, kind to his friends, appreciated the arts, and had a sense of humor. I chose to see my world through rose colored glasses and ignored all of his bad qualities, no matter how over the top they were. Like Beauty locked up in the Beast's castle, I developed my own brand of Stockholm Syndrome, identifying with my captor. I felt like there was no one I could turn to besides Hef. I thought I could trust him. Somehow, Hef became the good guy in my eyes. Slowly, I started to isolate myself from the other girls, for good reason, and from everyone outside the gates, for other reasons. I developed a reputation as an ice queen since I was so quiet and kept to myself. On the outside, Hef appeared to be the perfect gentleman, an act that paired nicely with my delusions. He always described himself as a hopeless romantic and acted as if his womanizing was some long search for the perfect woman that didn't exist. Whether this image was calculated to make him more palatable to the public, more endearing to potential conquests, or both, I don't know. All I know is that it worked on me like a charm. I felt strangely protective of him. The other girlfriends used him, mocked him, and even cheated on him with the boyfriends they kept outside the mansion. They made him look foolish, and I resented them for it. All the while overlooking the fact that we were mice trapped inside the glamorous maze he created. It was survival of the fittest, and we all were just trying to come out alive. I convinced myself that I could look past his age and appearance. Perhaps we're right for each other, I routinely told myself. After all, I had never fit in anywhere else before and certainly hadn't had any luck at love. Maybe guys my own age just weren't for me, I thought. Maybe I was always meant to one day find Hef. And just like that, I was in love. It didn't seem to matter that I couldn't recall how or why. Simply put, it was just a decision I made. By the time Christmas rolled around, I had already been at the mansion for 4 months. Nobody told me beforehand what the expectations were for us as girlfriends during the holidays, so I was surprised to find out that Christmases were always spent with Hef. Girlfriends were given off days before or after the holiday to visit family and friends, but there were no exceptions for the actual day itself. That was the one house rule that no one seemed to mind because Christmas was when Hef was most generous with his girlfriends. Hef really is a big kid at heart, and he loves the magic of Christmas morning. The mansion was always decorated from top to bottom. A formal Christmas dinner was held every year, and he spared no expense under the Christmas tree. Each girlfriend was given $500 to spend on gifts for each girl living at the mansion at that time, and $500 for ourselves.
Hold up. He only gave them $500? He only gave him $500. Rob gave $10,000. He gave $500. Oh, cheap old man. Cheap old man. Cheap old man. And he gave them $1,000 a week. So that's $4,000. Rob gave his, what, $5,000? Oh, cheap behind old man. All right, I'm sorry. I'm almost finished. Our time is almost done, but I'm just going to finish this chapter and then we'll continue tomorrow, okay? Hold on.
Idea was 7 sets of matching gifts. With 6 other girls in residence, that was $3,500 to spend. I selected elegant Louis Vuitton leather evening purses for each of us. They would be perfect for our nights out. My understated choice wasn't gaudy enough for Tina, however. She returned my gift in exchange for a Louis Vuitton bucket purse with the brand's logo emblazoned all over it. Carolyn got us Gucci purses. April chose fur jackets. I ended up donating mine to the Goodwill. Real fur's never really been my thing. Candace, who had stepped into the spot Adriana had left vacant, picked out large Gucci travel totes, and Vicky selected Gucci shoes. While the showering of luxurious items was beyond anything I'd ever imagined having just a few months earlier, we didn't have the financial freedom many people assumed, not even close. Obviously, we all wanted to save money, but Hef knew that money equals freedom to walk out the door, so he was exceptionally careful how he spent it on us. When Tina and Lisa chose Best Buy gift certificates to give each girlfriend at Christmas, Hef let it be known that he was severely displeased. I suppose gift cards too closely resembled cash for his taste. After Christmas, Lisa became the first girlfriend to depart since Adriana had left 4 months earlier. She found a modest apartment in LA and sent her 3 dogs home to her mom back east. And just like that, she packed up her things and drove off the property. Despite working regularly with Playmate Promotions, rumor had it she ran through her savings in just a few months and ended up moving back to her hometown after all. When I heard the news, my heart sank for her. She wanted so desperately to make it, to prove wrong all of those cynics back home who judged her decision to pose for Playboy. But I couldn't help but think that they'd been right. Where did it get her? She thought she was such hot shit, some of the girls gloated. She thought she had it made because she was a playmate and she couldn't even cut it out there on her own for a few months. Wow, she had a centerfold in everything, I thought. Even booking appearances as a playmate couldn't keep her afloat in LA. They were talking about her as if she were a laughingstock. It was clear I needed to land a good job or a few decent roles before I could ever go back out on my own. I wasn't having any luck landing a centerfold, and even that wasn't looking like the most secure gig anymore. When it came to our weekly clothing allowance, I socked away as much of it as I could to pay off my student loans and credit card debt and began creating a modest savings. It proved difficult, though, because we had to make sure that our allowance always appeared well spent. When Hazel, one of Hef's administrative assistants, suspected that a girl wasn't spending the money the way it was intended, she would let Hef know. Most of the girls were intolerable to the staff, and she was sick and tired of all the users. You should stop giving them so much clothing allowance, Hazel told Hef. They just wear bras and panties to the parties. They're clearly not spending it on clothes. This would always send him into a tizzy, and Tina would end up having to go to bat for herself and the other girls to make sure Hef didn't lower the allowance. It was clear that we had to have something to show for the money he gave us, and therefore it became a balancing act. Save as much money as you could, but spend enough so that our allowance doesn't get cut. Another well-placed catch-22 was the car situation. Girlfriends always got new cars while living at the mansion. Like everything else, what we drove around town in was a direct reflection of Playboy, and we had to keep up the image. Not to mention, those new fancy cars kept many females salivating over a spot in Hef's harem. Although Hef could easily buy each girl a car 10 times over if he wanted, he knew better than to buy the vehicles outright. Instead, he leased the cars for us. Doing things this way protected him from having girls drive right off in paid-for cars. Plus, it was another genius way to control us. If a girlfriend decided to leave the mansion, it's unlikely she would be able to meet the payments on her extravagant new ride. So, she either had to stay, risk the car getting repossessed, or leave it behind. One such car was a white Cadillac Escalade with monster truck tires, a lift kit, rims, and every other possible tricked-out add-on that was leased for former girlfriend Buffy Tyler. Buffy was a baby-faced, snub-nosed girl from Texas who had recently moved out after becoming Miss November 2000. Mary O'Connor, who had taken a liking to me, actually came to my rescue and suggested that Hef let me drive the repossessed SUV. When she mentioned my Celica, she wrinkled her nose. She was right. It looked like it belonged in a scrapyard, not in the driveway of the Playboy mansion. Happily and gratefully, I accepted, even though the car was way too big and gaudy for my taste. After all, beggars can't be choosers. Little did I know that accepting the new ride would cause the other girls to hate me even more, if that was possible. Not only was the Escalade more expensive than anything the other girls drove, but Hef had paid for all the pricey bells and whistles Buffy had installed on the car, something he wouldn't do for any of the other girls. Playing favorites and causing jealousy among the girlfriends was yet another little game he enjoyed. Obsessed with counting every last penny of who got what, the girls knew the value behind all the features Buffy had chosen for the luxury SUV. The cold shoulders I received were extra frigid for a good month after I started driving that car. Besides Christmas, clothes, and cars, the other large expense that Hef was happy to spend his money on were cosmetic enhancements. People often ask me if the girlfriends were required to have plastic surgery while living in the mansion, because it was clear so many of us did. The answer is both simple and complex. No, we were not obligated to have plastic surgery while living there. However, the mansion was a virtual breeding ground for superficial insecurities, and most girls who lived there ended up with body dysmorphic disorders. No matter how beautiful they were, these women would pick themselves apart, ordering one procedure after the next. It was known that if a girlfriend did choose to undergo some sort of plastic surgery, Hef would foot the bill. The most popular procedures among the girlfriends were breast augmentations, both new and redone, rhinoplasty, and liposuction. Eventually, I would ask for my own nose job, but that was only part of my Playboy makeover. During my first few months at the mansion, I was still a college-age girl who actually liked herself. Without school and work, I quickly became bored and filled my days with activities typical of a 22-year-old girl. Shopping, working out, getting my belly button pierced, things like that. One day, my friend Brittany and I decided to go get tattoos. I got a small Playboy bunny tattooed in the middle of my lower back. Talk about a tramp stamp. Because I thought it was a cute, fun way to commemorate this crazy experience. This was back when I thought my mansion stay was going to be a short-lived stepping stone that would soon lead me to something bigger. At the time, my only real beauty routine consisted of bleaching my own roots with Clairol Ultra Blue from the drugstore. One day, as I was performing the ritual in my bedroom with the door open, one of the girlfriends popped her head in. "What are you doing?" she snarled with a scrunched nose. "Dyeing my hair," I said defensively. What did it look like I was doing? I knew these wannabe Beverly Hills bitches looked down on anything do-it-yourself. "I need to save money. I can't spend it all at the salon." I actually hadn't been to a salon in my life. "Oh," she cooed maliciously, a smirk slowly spreading across her face. "That's smart." She laughed and sauntered down the hall. What she failed to tell me was that Hef had an open tab at the Jose Ibert salon in Beverly Hills, and all the girlfriends had their hair and nails professionally done there several times a week. None of the girls had bothered to share this piece of information with me because keeping me as homely as possible was in their best interests. Finally, I found out about the salon privileges when Vicky had lost patience with me using the strong-smelling dye in our shared bathroom. "You know you don't have to do your own hair, right?" she finally snapped. When I arrived at the Jose Ibert salon, it was like arriving in a whole new world. The staff whisked me into the salon and immediately changed my bright gold hair into the light platinum blonde Hef loved. They straightened my naturally frizzy mane and planted long acrylic nails on top of my short ones. Meanwhile, months of utilizing the mansion's gym and tanning beds had taken about 10 pounds off my figure and bronzed my skin into a smooth, perfect tan. Hef's dentist had given me a bleaching kit for my teeth, which gave my smile a perfect, bright Hollywood glow. The pictures we received the morning after each of our club nights out provided me with countless opportunities to study how I photographed. I quickly set about honing my makeup skills, which were virtually non-existent before the mansion. During my first few months there, I don't think I wore much besides powder and maybe a little mascara. Compared to the Playmates' carefully contoured faces, my sparse and natural look wasn't cutting it. My work-free days gave me hours and hours to shop for and experiment with makeup. I learned how to make my lips look bigger, my eyes more cat-like, and my eyebrows fuller and more defined. I felt like I was finally beginning to look like the glamorous playmate I'd always wanted to be. Staring at my photos, though, I knew there was one last thing to fix. I'd never really been fond of my nose. It was a little too big for my taste, but I rarely thought about it. It wasn't until I started seeing countless pictures of myself day after day that I realized it photographed even bigger than it was. I compared myself with the playmates in our group photos, most of whom had tiny, unnoticeable noses. Hef's favorite girls had baby faces with upturned, snub noses. I started to feel like it was about time I did something about it. While plastic surgery was a common request among the girlfriends, I was still terrified to discuss the idea with Hef. I was uncomfortable enough with my current living situation, so the last thing I wanted to do was ask for anything more. I already felt like enough of a hooker. I didn't need to fan the flame. The flame. Eventually, though, I caved. All the other girls get procedures, I told myself. It's only fair that I should be able to get one too. I took a deep breath and approached Hef. I'd spent time doing my research and decided to enlist the help of the same doctor who had performed a nose job on one of Hef's former girlfriends. A surgery so successful that Hef said he'd never seen such a transformation before. After dinner one night, I nervously brought the quote from the plastic surgeon to his room and shakily explained that I wanted to get my nose fixed. He gave me an obligatory 2-minute speech about how I didn't need the surgery, but quickly approved it despite his short-lived chivalry. It felt like a victory at the time, but I now recognize that it was one of those watershed moments in life. Sure, my new nose gave me a temporary surge of self-confidence, and I was absolutely thrilled with the results, but it wasn't my appearance that was in need of immediate attention. In a few short months, I had gone from a friendly, optimistic, confident woman to a confused girl with a nervous stammer who second-guessed every thought that went through her head and rationalized every bad decision she made. I was so focused on making it and turning this bad decision I had made into something positive that I couldn't see that all I was really doing was running faster and faster in circles, trying to please Hef and simply stay afloat in his twisted world. I had no time or energy left to chase my dreams. By this point, Tina Jordan had moved out and Hef had promoted me to his main girlfriend. One might think this would offer me some kind of protection from the mean girls, but no such luck. Actually, the other girlfriends all but shoved me into the number one slot. As Hef's main girlfriend, you were under the microscope. The mean girls reveled in their lives outside the mansion and didn't want the extra responsibility where Hef was concerned. Unlike the other girls, I didn't mind most of the rules. I didn't have an outside boyfriend and I wasn't crazy about clubbing, so I didn't mind the 9 p.m. curfew. The mean girls viewed it as a win-win. By having me ever present as the main girlfriend, their lack of perfect attendance wouldn't be as heavily scrutinized, but I wasn't hot enough to be any kind of real competition for the limited Playmate of the Month spots. If they were ever asked why Hef preferred homely little old me best, I'm sure they would lie and say it was because I was the only one who slept with him, just like they had all said about Tina. Despite the presumed prestige in its title, there was nothing ceremonious about becoming Hef's number one girlfriend. After Tina's Centerfold was published and she announced her departure, Hef simply asked me if I wanted to move into his room. That was sort of it. No promises were made, no piece of token jewelry was given. I simply prepared to pack up my things and move them down the hall, but not before Tina took the opportunity to remind me who was boss. Just as I was beginning to move into Hef's room, Tina dropped another bomb. She announced that she had decided not to move out after all. The other girls didn't even try to hide their smirks as she shared this news with me in front of everyone. It was clear I was the only one left out of this loop. My face burned red with embarrassment. "So you can just quit packing up your things," Tina said in her fake sing-song voice as she picked up her purse and followed an oblivious acting Hef out to the limo. I was hurt and embarrassed, but the subject was never broached again that night, so I just pretended the whole thing never happened. Over the next few weeks, Tina would show up halfway through movie nights only to shove me out of the way so she could sit next to Hef. She did the same thing with buffet dinners and would make a huge show out of forcing me to move my chair over so she could sit by Hef. I'm not sure if Tina was trying to make an impression on Hef so that he would be more likely to give her Playmate of the Year, or if she simply had that much fun torturing me. Eventually, though, the novelty wore off and Tina left for good. Being tossed back and forth like a useless rag doll by the man I had come to look to for approval did a massive number on my self-esteem. When I finally made the official transition into Hef's master suite, it felt anticlimactic. I was actually moving all of my belongings from a normal sized bedroom into a tiny corner of Hef's closet called the vanity. These cramped living quarters, without even a speck of privacy, was another reason none of the other girls were clamoring for the girlfriend number one title. The back area of Hef's closet contained a vanity, an island dresser, and closet space lining the walls. There was just enough room to walk between the island and the vanity, but that's it. In what looked like a castle's tower from the outside, the vanity had a few thin windows that looked out over the driveway. A musty rose-colored chair and a nightstand with a small box TV were wedged in front of the windows. I later talked Hef into installing a desk in place of the TV and chair, and putting down beautiful hardwood floors in place of the white carpet, which had long ago been ruined by dogs and Lord knows what else. I had a hard time believing that an elegant man like Hef, or so I assumed, preferred the nasty old carpet to the classic hardwood floors that so complemented the rest of the room. I was wrong. Instead, Hef insisted the change was a huge sacrifice he made for me, and that if this doesn't show you how serious I am about you, nothing will. Did he really just suggest that his love for me was reflected by his willingness to rip up decades-old carpet? I thought. Yes, he did. Speaking of declarations of love, now that I was Hef's number one girlfriend, the vows of love flowed freely, just as they had to Tina days earlier. I love you was something he said often and to anyone he was even remotely involved with, including me on what was our second night out together. I realized that was abnormal, but I came to hope that these feelings were true, particularly as he started referring to me in front of friends as the love of his life, and telling the press he expected to spend the rest of his life with me. That last quote quickly turned into a punchline as late-night comedians speculated if the rest of his life meant 1 or 2 more years. I suppose the main girlfriend role did have some other perks. Suddenly, playmates who had once mocked me were kissing my ass, bringing me gifts, and showering me with compliments now that I was Hef's number one girlfriend. The sudden shift in the way some of those girls acted was completely obvious and shameless, but I suppose they thought I was too dumb to notice, or that I would be so grateful to be treated kindly for a change that I wouldn't object. The reality was, I knew I had to choose my battles wisely. I graciously accepted their gifts and their compliments, but I wasn't stupid, and I never forgot how they had treated me before, when I was just the lowest blonde on the totem pole. Despite being on the receiving end of Hef's romantic declarations and suddenly being popular with the playmates, I still wasn't exempt from Hef's harsh criticisms. Among the many unspoken rules at the mansion, the red lipstick rule was one of the more notorious. Hef hated red lipstick. It was one of the few helpful hints I managed to squeeze out of Vicky. I'm not over-exaggerating here. Hef absolutely despised red lipstick and wouldn't allow his girlfriends to wear the color. Maybe he doesn't want lipstick on his collar, Vicky had suggested years earlier. I always found it so hard to believe because Hef has such a deep appreciation for the gorgeous film stars of the golden age of Hollywood. Betty Grable, Alice Faye, and his muse, Marilyn Monroe, were always painted with succulent red lips. It didn't make any sense that he wouldn't want his girlfriends to exude that same kind of glamour, so I didn't take her warning too seriously. I would learn my lesson the hard way. About 6 months after moving into the mansion, I felt ready for another makeover. I loved my waist-length, thick, natural hair. In fact, it had long been the physical attribute I was most proud of, mainly because it was the only thing I had that all the other girlfriends with their extensions and clip-in locks had to buy. New girls were always coming through the mansion's revolving door, but I was the only one with enviable hair. Until Mary Jo. She was a Southern belle flown out from Alabama for a Playmate test shoot. She had ass-length, blonde, all-natural hair and was dead set on becoming Hef's newest girlfriend. This woman This woman wasn't just any old blonde. She was single-handedly hijacking the only thing that made me different. I couldn't believe how threatened I felt by her. The fact that I could be so easily upset by something like this made me want to rebel, to do something that would make me an individual so that I wouldn't constantly feel so replaceable. I was cracking under the pressures of living at the mansion and resented the fact that everyone had to look like such a clone. Save for the blonde hair, the big boobs, and our shared address, I had absolutely nothing in common with these girls. So why should we have to look like we were carbon copies of one another? I decided to take it upon myself to embrace a more retro aesthetic. A look that captured the old Hollywood glamour I was so fascinated with. Think more Marilyn, less Pamela. One sunny afternoon, I decided to do the unthinkable, chop off all my hair. I drove directly to the hair salon and instructed my stylist to cut off about 20 inches of platinum blonde hair. It was a drastic move, but I felt liberated by my short new coif. While all the girls were in a race to see who could have the longest hair possible, I had a flirty, chin-length bob. I completed the look by having the hairdresser and makeup artist style me like Marilyn Monroe. Though I was making the change for me, I was also sure that Hef wouldn't mind. After all, he worshipped Marilyn and often cited her as the ideal in feminine beauty. When I got back to the mansion, complete with curled bob, black eyeliner, and red lips, I sat down at my vanity. This is a fun look, I thought, admiring my new reflection as I heard Hef shuffle into the bedroom. "Come in here, Puffin," I said in a happy sing-song voice. "I want to show you something." I stood up and straightened out my white juicy couture jumpsuit when he finally appeared in the doorway. "What did you do?" he spat at me. Instantly, I was taken aback. "I got a little makeover," I said sheepishly, giving a slight pat to my new hair. Any shred of confidence I found over the last few hours was quickly evaporating. "I thought you would like it." "Well, I don't," he hissed, taking a moment to analyze my new makeup and hair. My eyes immediately darted to the floor. I didn't know what to say. Of all the reactions he could have had, I was the least prepared for this one. I stood there silent. "Actually, I hate it," he continued, the words shooting like knives off his tongue. "I hate the whole look. I hate the makeup, and I hate the red lipstick." I couldn't help the tears that began streaming down my face, ruining the makeup I had been so excited about. I sank back onto the tufted stool. Was this really happening? He'd never yelled at me like this before. "Don't ever wear red lipstick again," he warned me in a low voice and turned towards the door. I was utterly dumbfounded. It was such an irrational reaction to something so small. Even once he saw me crying, there wasn't an ounce of sympathy in his voice. He only saw red, pun intended. He paused and turned back around to survey my reaction. Deciding he hadn't done enough damage, he served me one final blow before storming out of the room. "You look old, hard, and cheap." That was it. End of conversation. But that's how disagreements always ended with Hef. He would just stomp off and you were left to pick the pieces of your self-worth up off the floor. I'd invested every part of myself in Hef and the mansion and had nothing waiting for me outside those gates. I felt so trapped and so vulnerable to his criticisms. This old man had just humiliated me, and I sat there taking his ridicule like a child. I curled up on the vanity stool and sobbed for what felt like forever in the one little corner of this whole giant mansion that was supposed to be my own. But even that wasn't real. It was his world, all of it. He made no mention of the conversation again. When you're the king of all you survey, you don't really need to say much more. His point was clearly made. For many years, his words rang in my ears. Old, hard, and cheap. Who says that to a person they supposedly love? The whole episode made me feel beyond ugly, as if all the beauty products and cosmetic surgery in the world couldn't make me look good. I felt like an idiot for even trying to be beautiful. Maybe I was just the homely girl who was lucky enough for Hef to allow into the mansion. That's certainly how his actions made me feel. Needless to say, from then on, I stuck religiously to corals, pinks, and nudes, never daring to try red lipstick in front of him again. Just when I was starting to give up hope that I could ever find any real positivity in Hef's twisted world, someone new caught my eye. I looked up from my book and adjusted the messy bun on top of my head that was disguising my poorly received new haircut. I wonder who that is, I thought. A bubbly Carmen Miranda costumed blonde sauntered across the pool area handing out shiny beaded necklaces with tiny bottles of Jack Daniels attached to all of the partygoers. Happy Cinco de Mayo! The girl beamed, a huge gleaming smile on her face as she handed me a necklace. She had a large red headdress balanced on top of her head and seemed unusually perky. Thanks, I said, accepting the beads and watching her walk over to Hef's backgammon table. How fun, I thought. Lately, I had become used to putting on a cheerful facade, since on the inside I was essentially Eeyore with a rain cloud following my every step. This girl was like a ray of sunshine so unlike the other Fun in the Sun party guests, all of whom spent the days self-consciously preening themselves while wearing boring basic bikinis. She seemed to glide right out of an old Hollywood musical. I assumed she had to work for Playboy or Jack Daniels or something. I mean, you had to be getting paid to be that bubbly, right? That evening, after freshening up, I wandered downstairs for dinner and heard someone blurt out, "You cut your hair!" My new look had been so poorly received that I wasn't expecting any sort of compliments when I arrived in the Great Hall. Immediately, I spotted Miss Chiquita Banana sitting on the bench in a clueless-inspired plaid skirt and matching top. "Oh yeah," I finally replied, self-consciously running my hand under my new blonde bob. "I donated it to charity." "Oh, locks of love?" she asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Yeah," I said, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to melt away. "They say they don't take colored hair, but my hair's really strong and it was super long, so I sent like 20 inches off in case they could turn it into a wig or something." It was the most I had said in hours, maybe days. Something about this girl allowed me to relax. I didn't feel like I needed to be on guard, and I could sense that she genuinely wanted to be my friend. "Oh, that's so sweet. I've always wanted to do that," she cooed before sticking her hand out in front of me. "I know we've met before, but I'm Bridget." "I'm Holly," I said, a smile taking over my face. "It's really nice to meet you again." Bridget started popping up around the mansion pretty regularly after that. Much to my surprise, she was just another girl invited to spend time at the mansion. Her cheerfulness wasn't an act, and she wasn't being paid to promote a brand, as I had initially assumed. She didn't have that same desperate air about her that plagued most of the girls who frequented Hef's place. Plus, she wasn't another platinum plastic wannabe. This girl was refreshingly natural. She had dark blonde hair, natural makeup, was plastic surgery free, and was always outfitted in some sort of themed ensemble. She was a walking, talking candy cane, and I liked having her around. In a way, she reminded me of myself before Hef and his girlfriends had completely stripped me of my confidence. It wasn't long before we became best friends. Her energy was contagious, making it nearly impossible to ever be in a bad mood when you're with her. Plus, it was a welcome relief to have a new friend in the house. Eventually, Bridget Marcourt became one of Hef's girlfriends. When she moved in, I had already been at the mansion for more than a year and had been witness to the comings and goings of quite a few girlfriends. But for once, I didn't mind a new face taking up residence. Looking back, I often wonder if having a friend like Bridget earlier might have saved my sanity. If I had had anyone else to turn to besides Hef, maybe I would have been able to recognize the situation for what it was instead of convincing myself to fall in love with him.
All right, guys, we are finished. I'm going to continue tomorrow. I set the time for tomorrow for us to continue this book. So I will see you guys later. Forensic Tech Guy said, "Later, guys. I had enough of this bimbo lies." Said it. Thanks, Miss Sylvia, for showing us how these women lie. Yep. All right, guys, let's go over to the other side of the world. I think Choke just came on live, and let's go check him out. All righty. See you guys tomorrow. Check the time for the next reading. All right, later. You're welcome, PQ. I have her book, and I'm also gonna do that young lady the model, the one that was there at 10 years old, I have her book too. So we're going to start listening to these people and see what happened to them. Brooke Shield, that's the other one. I have her book also. All right, I'll see you guys later. I love you guys. Bye.